had a very long history in looking into affordable housing issues. We've partnered with a number of you in this room over the course of many, many years, and very pleased to be hosting this event today. For those of you who did stop in today, we have copies of one of our publications from a number of years ago, a toolkit for affordable housing. One of the things that you'll see in that document is some references to inclusionary zoning practices, as well as a number of other tools that have been implemented, both in this region and around the country, some best practices, if you will. About 3 years ago, COG embarked on an effort called Region Forward. I think many of you have seen this document. It set a whole series of goals, targets, and indicators for the region. And earlier this year, we produced this report, which was the baseline report. And we pulled it down from our website. The only reason I would call this to your attention again is that we teed up a number of different goals, targets, and indicators that I mentioned. But one of the major challenges that this region faces is the supply of affordable housing, and not just the supply of affordable housing, but in the right place. If we learn nothing else here at the Council of Governments, land use transportation connections are extremely critical. So with that, I'm going to be very it's just my pleasure to introduce a long-time friend and advocate for so many in the community, and also very active and engaged elected official down here at the Council of Governments on so many meta levels within our Climate Environmental Policy Committee and our Board of Directors. And so with that, it is my great pleasure to introduce Mr. Roger Berliner, the President of the Montgomery County Council.
Good morning to you. Hopefully the mic will work. It's never a good thing to get introduced when the mic is going crazy. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for your work on behalf of our community. And so let me also thank COG. This is a major issue for our region, and I'm proud that the Council of Governments has been at the forefront of making sure that we think through these issues, because they are hard issues to think through. And let me also thank the Coalition for Smart Growth for their involvement, because I had this brief conversation with Cheryl Corbett saying, okay, Coalition for Smarter Growth, and I, as chair of our Transportation Committee, worked closely with Cheryl. I just wanted to hear her articulate, why is it that this is so important to the Coalition for Smarter Growth? And that's because if we are going to have transit-oriented development, then one of our goals, of course, is to make sure that we have a workforce that is right there next to our transit. And that doesn't happen easily, because our transit facilities typically now are among our most expensive places to live. So the relationship between transit-oriented development and housing is so critical, and I'm just so grateful that Cheryl has been at the forefront of this issue, and also, of course, the Northern Virginia Affordable Housing Alliance. Thank you for your sponsorship of this important conversation. I saw earlier today our fabulous Director of Housing, Rick Nelson, and so really if there's anybody that should be standing here before you, it is not Roger Berliner, it is Rick Nelson, because he's given a lifetime to these sets of issues. And we are quite proud in Montgomery County of having been at the forefront of inclusionary zoning, and since the early 70s, it's something that we recognized in Montgomery County was so critical for our community. And when you think of why it is your work is so important, you can really talk about it on any level you want. You can talk about it on the moral level, you can talk about it on the economic development level, you can talk about it on the health of the community. And on the moral level, I think we all appreciate it. Affordable housing is as close to a right as anything that we can speak to. I mean, there's health. I'm one of those people that are grateful that we now have health insurance, national health insurance. But housing, oh my goodness. You've got to have a place to live, an affordable place to live for your family. And as Dr. Stephen Fuller has made clear, our region is in such a deficit mode when it comes to affordable housing. And for our economic development future, affordable housing is so critical, because we need to attract good jobs in our region. And people will locate in our region if they have a workforce that can actually get to their jobs, live close to their jobs. So affordable housing becomes an underpinning of our region moving forward. And finally, let me just say that my own personal experience, and I'm sure many of you realize that a stratified community is not a healthy community. A community is healthy when all of us are living together, because we learn so much from each other. We are bigger as a result of being together, as opposed to being stratified in our little economic niches. And so for me, on every level, your work is so terribly important. And as your conference makes clear, you've got issues. We've got issues. This is not easy stuff. You've got implementation issues. You've got whole sets of lending sets of issues with my favorite, FHFA and FHA, really, never mind, I won't go there. I deal with them in a different program called Property Assessed Clean Energy, which the Federal Housing Financing Authority just squashed because of its concern with respect to foreclosures. So I can only guess the sorts of issues that you deal with in affordable housing every day. And our county has certainly had its share of issues, and we've taken a different path. There's just a path of practicality and surrender, if you will, both combined to make sure that we can go forward. So look forward, I know all of you look forward to the learning you will have here with respect to it. We as a county were quite proud that at one point we had something, I believe, on the order of 13,000 MPDUs in our county. But when we developed the program early on, we didn't have a requirement that those units stay in existence for long enough. So now, of that 13,000, I think it's something on the order of 2,300 that we have in existence today of that original 13,000. So we changed our rules as a response. So I don't know, you've got to dedicate these for, particularly if you're renting for 99 years. It's important. You can't just have these things flip to market rates at an early time frame. That's just one example of the kinds of things that we are learning in Montgomery County. We're also learning in Montgomery County that one of the underserved populations that's important in the community that I represent is our seniors. Our seniors are desperate for affordable housing. And we've made great strides in Montgomery County in that regard too. And one of the things that gives me, I'm pleased about, is that we made great strides by using county-owned land and using your county assets in that way makes such a difference. And as Mr. Nelson gets tired of hearing me have this conversation about co-locating affordable housing on every county facility that we have, that this is our opportunity, not just with the development community, because that's a hard conversation with the development community, but we actually had a developer recently that came in, and we have a 12.5% MPDU requirement, and they came in at 15%. They came in at 15%, and they threw in a few more moderately priced units on top for working households that are priced at a slightly higher level. So we actually made an advance in that regard. And we have, as I'm sure you have, the conversations all the time as to how much exactions to be able to have with our development community. And those are hard conversations. And hopefully that at some point we will have a sort of a regional analysis of that issue, because we often hear in Montgomery County, oh, in Northern Virginia, they don't exact all of this for affordable housing. And of course, then that puts us at a competitive disadvantage, and no single community wants to be at a competitive disadvantage to another community when it comes to economic development. And that's certainly true between Montgomery County and Fairfax. So it is important that we have an agreed upon baseline. So what does each community do to make sure that the development community, as it moves forward, does what it needs to do? And finally, in our communities, particularly around this region, we are fortunate in many ways, but the cost of living in our communities is obviously quite high. So what do you do for your high-priced units? And in Montgomery County, we struggle with that issue as well. Do we insist that the developer provide on-site in that precise location, that 12.5 MPDUs? And what happens if that just gets in the way of making this happen? And so for a number of years now, we've been struggling with whether or not we can do this maybe at a slightly different site it's not quite as expensive? Can we get more affordable housing still in the same community, because no community should shirk its responsibility to be part of the solution here. But does it have to be in that particular complex? And these issues get really wrapped around the axle very quickly. And so with all of that, let me end where I began by thanking you for your good work, how important your work is to the health of our community, to maintaining our moral fiber, and by ensuring that our competitiveness is strong and that our people live and work in lovely places. Thank you very much. I look forward to your work.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Michelle Crocker with the Northern Virginia Affordable Housing Alliance. Excuse me. And we are a co-sponsor of this event today, and we're very proud to be here with the Coalition for Smarter Growth and with COG to discuss this really important event that we all work in and labor for, to have affordable housing within our communities. But before I start, I just have to say that as we mourn the loss of the Nationals on Friday, aren't we all excited that the Redskins really won yesterday? So it's a good Monday morning. It's a little gloomy out there, but it's a good Monday morning. So I just had to kick off with that. My family is still talking about it. So I am here to the business at hand to introduce our first speaker, Jeff Lavelle, who will talk to us about inclusionary zoning as a tool and help us be more informed as we move forward in the day. So Jeff is the Executive Director of the Center for Housing Policy, a research affiliate of the National Housing Conference. Specializing in solutions from research, the center works to broaden understanding of the nation's housing challenges and to examine the impact of policies and programs developed to address the needs. From 2000 to 2003, Jeff served as Director of the Policy Development Division at the Office of Policy Development and Research at HUD, and he's also worked as an independent consultant and as a housing policy analyst for the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. Jeff is also a graduate of Harvard College and Harvard Law School, and we welcome him this morning to talk about inclusionary zoning as a policy, national policy. Thank you, Jeff.
Good morning. Good morning. Glad to see some folks have gotten to the middle in the mash pit here. I was a little worried the first row was completely empty about 2 minutes ago, but anyway. So I see, look around the room, and I see at least a half dozen people who could probably give this speech a lot better than I could. So I will, I'll do my best. And I will say this quick tip. I don't see anyone of college age, but you can tell your children. When I was in college, I always made a point of never ever writing about a topic that the professor knew too much about. That's how it feels a little bit this morning, coming here and talking about inclusionary zoning to a bunch of folks who have made their lives doing this program. And of course, it's really an honor to be here in the cradle of the inclusionary zoning civilization, where inclusionary zoning originated. So, thank you. I've been asked to talk about the national perspective on inclusionary zoning, and just kind of a quick note. The Center for Housing Policy has a website called housingpolicy.org, where we try to collect a lot of information about what's happening around the country. And we try our best to keep it up to date, but one of the things that inevitably happens is things change and things get out of date. And we just urge you to let us know if you've done anything that you think we ought to reflect on that site so we can make it a better site for everybody. It is one of the unfortunate realities of our national housing policy that most of the most interesting and relevant policies happen at the local level, and there really is no effective way to share information across the nation. And certainly HUD does not make it its practice to try to facilitate that type of dialogue, and so we've stepped into the breach, but we need your help. So take a look at housingpolicy.org on inclusionary or any other topic and let us know how we can strengthen it to help you and help others learn from each other. Okay, so how is inclusionary zoning faring nationally? Well, I would say there's two themes, and one theme is one of durability, a policy that really has remained remarkably durable in the face of what has to be described, I think, as the most extraordinary housing conditions that any of us could have imagined. But the second is that there have been a set of new challenges that have been faced over the last several years and are continuing to face, and I'm sure you'll be talking about some of them this morning. But I do want to flag just a few of them. One of them is trying to adapt inclusionary zoning to the downturn in the housing market, to the changed environment that we face. And then, by the way, for those of you who haven't gotten outside of the DC metro area, the rest of the country has not had the same trajectory that you all have had. And there's been quite a significant drop in housing prices around the country, and DC has held up remarkably well. You all know this, but I'm telling you anyway, right? This has been, probably the signature issue that most of the country has been facing. The second issue, though, is as much a challenge as it is an opportunity, which is the increased interest and demand for living in close-in neighborhoods, near transit, near job centers, in places where transportation costs are low. We've been talking about this for a long time. We're starting to see it now, and it presents some both challenges and opportunities, I think, for inclusionary. And the third is really a series of legal challenges to inclusionary that has culminated in particular in California in a policy that basically has rendered inclusionary zoning for rental housing completely unlawful as an unlawful form of rent control. And this it matches up with what's happened in a number of other communities like Denver, where they do not apply inclusionary to rental housing. And so the way they're dealing with this is very interesting and important, and hopefully you'll never have this issue here, but you should be aware that it's happening, and we should talk a little bit about it. And I'm going to try to keep on time here. Okay, so first of all, durability. The story of the last 5 years has been a real downturn in the housing market, obviously related foreclosure crisis. And what we hope is now finally bottom and stabilization just recently in many parts of the country. Now what's going to happen in the future is anyone's guess. My personal opinion is that there's a lot of pent-up housing demand for new household formation, for folks moving. And if we start to see economic recovery, I think there'll be a lot. People will be surprised at what happens very quickly. On the other hand, there's a huge foreclosure inventory. There's a huge shadow inventory behind that of people who want to sell. And so, perhaps for a while, those will counterbalance each other. But we've seen a number of smaller markets really burn through 15 years worth of inventory in the course of 4 months. And so that's been very interesting and could foretell perhaps some sharp uptick in housing construction in some of those markets. So what's happened to IZ, right? This was a big question I think a lot of us had. In a down market, obviously IZ is not producing units, right? Because it depends entirely on new production. But we've just started now a paper, Robert Hickey, some of you may have been contacted by Robert Hickey on my staff, who is writing actually on the topic that you all are going to be talking about today, which is what's happened to IZ, what are the current challenges. And I asked Robert to try to understand what's happened around the country. Have there been a lot of communities that have rolled back their IZ policies? Right? And you can imagine the argument, you're probably hearing it. We have a struggling economy. Our economy, we need to get housing production back on track. Housing drives jobs, and in a struggling economy, we can't afford to do IZ, right? Because that's obviously, it makes the economics more difficult. We need to produce units so we can create jobs. Maybe we can bring IZ back in 20 years or never, as the case may be. But the reality is that, we found only a handful of jurisdictions that have given up their policies. We are up to 5 out of roughly 400 that we're aware of. Now, we didn't do a survey or a census. Another challenge here, right, is that it's hard to get good data. But really, the story is one of durability in the face of the downturn rather than the loss of policies. And I think that speaks to the understanding of the importance of IZ and understanding perhaps that the downturn, while certainly bringing housing prices back in track with incomes, is not necessarily something that's going to last forever. And I look at these economists who say that housing has finally got back in line with incomes, and I wonder if they're talking to the economists who know anything about supply and demand at the local level and know that a lot of the reasons why housing prices are so out of whack in a lot of places is that there's an inadequate supply to meet demand, and it's becoming more and more difficult to build out in places that are location efficient. So anyway, you all know this. But a number of communities have continued to produce units despite the downturn. Montgomery County, I'm sure someone here will correct me, but the data we have suggests we've produced more than 700 MPDUs since 2008, in the middle of what has been a downturn in most of the rest of the country, about half rental, half ownership. And so clearly there's still an interest in affordable housing, thank goodness. There's an interest in inclusion, and the importance of creating communities that provide housing for families of all incomes. We're all familiar, I think, with the research that was done in Montgomery County looking at the impact of inclusionary policies on educational achievement for children, and basically found that among public housing residents, those who located to lower poverty areas did much better than those who located to sort of moderate poverty areas, which was exactly the hypothesis that a lot of folks have been talking about, but it was important to see some data backing that up. But it also reflects, I think, the fact that this has been a policy that has been willing to change and evolve. And that's very, very important. Housing markets change, and we are all constantly being confronted with, I think, valid claims that things are different, and that we need to look at our numbers and look at our policies and make appropriate adjustments. And I hope that's something we'll talk about today, because static policies in the face of changing markets create tensions that could lead to their undermining. But I think about the council chairman spoke this morning about the changes to Montgomery's policies about preserving the long-term affordability of those units. Thank God they've done that, because we lost a lot of units before those changes were made. I know in Fairfax County, I see my colleague Conrad served on the high-rise task force, right, in Fairfax County to try to adapt inclusionary policies to high-rise buildings where there's a different set of economic conditions. So very, very important to make those changes. Okay, so what are the challenges? Well, one set of challenges clearly has been the decline in the housing markets, and you see this in a number of different ways. One, of course, is the lack of production. So people say, hey, we've got these policies that are supposed to produce affordable housing and haven't done anything for us in the last 5 years. Maybe we should look at some other policies. Second, you see folks arguing that they should be changed because they're hindering growth. And then the third, and probably the one you've experienced most here, are concerns about what happens when the market price for housing declines, so that housing that is deed restricted can no longer sell for a price that allows people to get their money out. This is indeed a serious issue, but it's also one that reminds us that inclusionary zoning is not intended to be a panacea for every single issue that our market faces, and folks out there have lost a lot of money, even investing in an affordable unit entails some measure of risk in the face of historic downturns. But the fact that you're buying below market entails a considerable amount of protection. So to the extent that folks have lost money on resale, it's been a lot less than people have lost in the private sector. And that sounds good to us, but of course it's no comfort to people who are in those situations, which to me underscores the importance really of actively managing your deed-restricted portfolio, of having a steward entity that is there to really help homeowners who are facing challenges on resale, or because one of the solutions, of course, is to wait and try not to sell your home until the market rebounds, and you can't do that if you can't refinance your home, or if you can't have access to short-term loans to help you deal with short-term disruption. So My hypothesis is those communities that have actively managed their deep restricted portfolios, that have stewardship in place, have done better than those that have not. But I'd be eager to hear your opinions as we move through the day. So the second issue I want to talk about, and the one that I think is really the biggest opportunity, is really the shift in housing demand. Here's the hypothesis, right? Rising number of older adults, rising number of younger adults, particularly those without children, rising oil prices, all of these things are going to conspire to increase the demand for living near transit, near job centers, in places where you don't necessarily need to drive long distances in order to go about your life. And that ought to, that increased demand for housing in close-in neighborhoods ought to do a whole bunch of things that are really wonderful for the broader environment, right? We ought to see greater density, reductions in what they call vehicle miles traveled, which is a measure of car usage that is related to energy use and your greenhouse gas emissions and everything. There's only one problem, which is that in our world, it's very difficult to build in these locations, and so the supply is not able to keep up with demand. Basic economics tells you when supply can't keep up with demand, price goes up, right? And so I think both the challenge and the opportunity is that as this demand increases for housing in close-in neighborhoods, we are going to see price increases that are going to push a lot of the low and moderate income families further and further away. It's going to do exactly what Cheryl is fearing, which is it's going to exacerbate sprawl. And we're going to miss really what I think is a historic, once in a generation or perhaps lifetime opportunity to really achieve a mix of incomes and inclusion in ways that are pro-market rather than anti-market, right? Rather than trying to force established suburbs to open up and let one unit at a time in, which is very important, we should stop that, but it tends to produce low numbers of units. If we can figure out a way to accommodate that demand in near transit, near job centers, then we could actually build a coalition, right, that takes environmental groups that care about preservation of open space and greenhouse gas emissions and smart growth groups and public health groups that care about walkability and development groups that want sort of more revenue and economic development. If we can figure out how to do this in a way that doesn't push low and moderate income families out, but ensures that low and moderate income families have access to all these benefits, and we can line up the affordable housing groups with all these other groups and build what I hope can be a winning coalition for mixed income, location efficient neighborhoods that really can be the next phase of the nation's housing expansion. Now to do that, it's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of work trying to deal with some of the supply barriers that are preventing that from happening, right? Density restrictions, unpredictable zoning variance processes, long, cumbersome planning processes that can take years, environmental rules that end up turning into obstacles rather than facilitators of good development. And again, lots of, all these regulations have meaningful and important reasons, but in the aggregate, they conspire to drive up the price of housing. But it also requires that we have an affordability strategy, and one of the real opportunities for Inclusionary is to be that policy, right, that provides an opportunity for us to really take advantage of this cycle and build affordability into the DNA of new development that's taking place near transit, near job centers, and location-efficient places. That is, I think, a huge, important opportunity that we need to figure out how to take advantage of. Now to do this, we're going to have to, you know, we have a big challenge ahead, and hopefully we'll talk a little bit about it today. You know, one of the challenges, of course, is land prices are already very expensive in these places. We have development barriers, limitations on density, sort of not in my backyard sentiments, all the usual thing, exacerbated up several knots because there are land assembly challenges, there are lots of practical barriers that get in the way. So one of the things that we can think about, you know, is really trying to think about developing not one development at a time, but a area at a time. Planning around transit, around these places that really creates the infrastructure that can facilitate this development in terms of structured parking. We hear that a lot, right? Very expensive to deal with the parking. Can we find a way to finance structured parking for the whole sort of area? Can we build the roads and the sidewalks and everything that will then facilitate this development and as part of the deal, ensure that there's some housing affordable to families of all incomes. I would, at the risk of overusing this example, I think Tyson's Corner is certainly illustrative of the potential to do this on steroids. Very exciting to see what's happening there in terms of the density and the affordability that's being produced. I don't want to have any illusions that other communities can snap their fingers and create 4 new metro stations in an area that's already at relatively low densities and has the potential to scale up. It's not going to happen everywhere, but it is certainly a very important and exciting policy, and I congratulate them for their progress. Finally, I just want to talk about legal challenges. California has basically decided that inclusionary zoning is an unlawful form of rent control. When you combine that with the loss of their redevelopment authority, which provided that 20% of new tax increment financing proceeds went for affordable housing to a redevelopment agency that would then use it for the good, California has really been devastated. And we often say that California, they're several years ahead of us in terms of all kinds of trends. I hope they're not ahead of us in terms of this trend. It would be a real concern. But I just want to highlight one thing here, which is I don't actually think you're necessarily going to have this. Maybe there are legal experts here who think this is going to happen. But it's interesting to look at the response, is all I want to say, to what communities are trying to do in California. Because really, what a lot of them are talking about doing is saying, let's drop our baseline zoning down to levels that are essentially uneconomic and unrealistic, and require everyone to come through and get a variance. I'm exaggerating slightly. Require everyone to come through to get a variance, do anything sensible, and as a condition of getting the variance, we can extract affordability. And that may or may not be lawful. I think it is probably lawful. But the question is that the right approach, right? And let's contrast that with the other approach. The other approach is to say, let's get the density right? Let's remove the barriers to development, but then let's have a requirement that a certain percentage of those units be affordable. These are really, I think, the two options. We see around the country communities go in either direction. But I want to just throw out an idea. I would love to get feedback during the course of the day. It seems to me that there may be a way to broaden the base of support for inclusionary by taking this idea of going to the right baseline density and not have a case-by-case approach to the next level and really create a process where development is more predictable, is faster, and is affordable, right? So imagine you take our current, and again, I apologize for those, we may already have this here, but hear me out for a second. To a large extent, inclusionary has relied on a trade, right? We will give you more density. We may give you some relief on parking, right? Maybe a few other things. And the trade for that is affordability. We try to make that, come out roughly equal, or in some places more, some places less, but it's a trade, and we want the numbers to work. And that, we get grudging acceptance from developers and figure out how to make the system work, and we get a lot of opposition from everybody else. But what a lot of developers tell us, at least, is what they really want is a more predictable development process where they need fewer variances, where there's more as-of-right development, where densities are set in economic terms, where all the rules of the game are clear, so they can make their investments knowing exactly what the rules are and not have to sort of go through this expensive and time-consuming permitting process and zoning variance process that exposes them to more influence from NIMBY, et cetera, et cetera. So is there a way to combine all of these things and really create the win-win? Particularly I'm thinking of in places where density makes a lot of sense, so around transit and job centers, right? We basically create a system where development occurs according to preset rules, right? Whether it's form-based codes or some other approach that says this is what, everyone knows what the density is going to be. You don't need a variance every time you want to build, but we're going to provide as part of that. Now you have more predictable development, you have more density, you have less parking, and you're going to have affordability. And could we actually get a broader range of support for those policies, perhaps, than we sometimes have now? So I'm going to close with that, just an idea. I'll look forward to the day, but really just want to express the greatest appreciation for the work that you all do. I know this is hard. That's what we're going to, the rest of the day is going to be hard, right? We're going to talk about all the really difficulties, but it is, we've done a lot of work looking at the impact of affordable housing on health. the impact on affordable housing on education, the connection of housing and transportation. By the way, look for our updated numbers on housing and transportation this week. Very, very important work that you do, so thank you all.
Thank you, Jen. A few housekeeping issues before we continue. We encourage people to be in front. So if you came in a little later, we'd love you to be in front. We also want you to know that there is food and coffee and water back here. So please help yourselves to that. Our next speaker is Dr. Lisa Sturdivant. She is going to talk to us about the region's housing market and price trends for the next 5 years. Many of us have been very fortunate to hear Lisa as she has become an increasing spokesperson from the George Mason Center for Regional Analysis. Lisa is an associate research professor at George Mason University School of Public Policy and deputy director of the Center for Regional Analysis. Her primary areas of research include regional economic development, migration, mobility, demographics, and housing. Her most recent research includes articles and reports on housing demand in the Washington, D.C. metro area, residential mobility and migration, and forecasts of development for the Dulles-Whale corridor. Lisa is a professor at George Mason University. She has also worked formerly at Arlington County as the county demographer. So without further ado, I know Lisa is familiar to many of us. We're really thrilled to have her here this morning. So let's welcome Lisa Sturdivant. Thank
you. Good morning, everybody. Good morning again, and thank you very much to COG, to the Coalition for Smarter Growth, and the Virginia Affordable Housing Alliance for inviting me to speak. I tell every time I come, I love coming down to COG. I love coming to places where I get to see folks from across the region. We don't have many venues where folks from Maryland, Virginia, and the district are all coming together. And COG serves a very important function in bringing us all together to talk about an issue that, frankly, has to be spoken about at the regional level. We have to make policy at the local level in many cases, but truly this issue of housing is a regional issue. My job that I was tasked with is to set a little bit of the context of what's been going on in the region's housing market, maybe thinking ahead a little bit, out 5 years. I'm actually going to go out 10 because that's some numbers that I have. And just give you some food for thought on where we stand in terms of prices and rents and supply of housing here in the Washington area. And I first need to start with the economy. Housing and the economy are certainly clearly linked. As we come out of the most recent recession, we can see that the job growth in the Washington, D.C. area has been pretty steady for the last 2.5, nearly 3 years, where we've had monthly job growth. Those are those blue bars. We did lose jobs during the recession. We don't always fall into recession when the nation does, but we did fall into recession here in the greater Washington area, losing over 50,000 jobs all told during the recession, which formally ended, as I think we all know now, but still have a hard time believing, in the summer of 2009. So the recession has been over for 3 years, technically. And so here in the Washington area, we recovered faster than other places. We tend to after recessions because of the activities of the federal government that are ramped up to respond to the recession. And we tended to add jobs faster than other places. We outpaced all other metropolitan areas for the first couple of years after the recession in terms of job growth and economic growth. That's not true anymore. There are places around the country that are frankly doing better than us in terms of job growth. Houston, Austin, New York, Boston, places that have really hit their stride in the recovery. And as we see how our economy is structured, we've listed here the sectors of our economy, that is the industries that make up the Washington area economy, ordered by size. So our two biggest sectors are the professional and business services sector and the federal government. So the federal government is second, but the professional and business services includes many, many employers that are tied to the federal government contractors on the defense side, the life sciences side. So what we can see, as we've added nearly 40,000 jobs over the last 12 months, we have lost jobs on the federal government side. We've actually seen slower job growth in the professional business services side. The growth we're seeing now tends to be in slightly lower paying jobs. If I had put this chart up a few years ago, we would have had really strong growth in professional business services in the federal government, certainly in education and health services. These tend to be sectors that are relatively high-paying jobs. And as we look at pictures of how our housing market recovered, these are the jobs and the workers in those jobs who are demanding housing and putting upward pressure on home prices and on rents, even as other folks were having trouble finding housing. More recently, like I said, we've been having slower growth in our major sectors, but all in all, our economy is stronger than many other places. You can see these squiggly lines show the unemployment rate. The orange line is the U.S. unemployment rate, which is, I think you probably heard, dipped down to 7.8% last month. That's a seasonally adjusted number, and I'm showing a not seasonally adjusted number. The only reason is that's what we have for our region, so we could be comparing apples to apples. In Northern Virginia, the unemployment rate is 4.3%. In some jurisdictions in Northern Virginia, the unemployment rate is down to 2.5%, 3%. Very tight labor market. So signs in the economy have been good since the recovery period. So I wanted to talk a little bit what that means for a housing market. And I'm going to talk about what's happened recently because I think that's important for us to understand the context that we're operating in today. But I did want to share some new charts that we put together that showed what's happened in the region over the last 40 years. And so these bars show the change in constant dollars in median household income, in median home value, and in gross rent over the last 40 years. So while household income has increased by 46%, median home values in the region have increased by 144%. While median household income has increased by 46%, rent has gone up by nearly 70%. So by these measures, housing costs have far outpaced income growth in the Washington area, despite the fact that we are a high income area, despite the fact that we're an economically vital region. And let me also say this, and you already know this is the median, right? The median, the middle, right? There are folks below the median for whom these numbers are even more daunting, where the lowest quintile of incomes has grown slower than the upper portion of incomes. And so when we look at median, we have to remember, when we look at middle numbers, we have to remember there's a whole distribution of households that are seeing housing costs outpace income growth over the last few decades. Similarly, over the last 40 years, supply of housing in the region has not kept up with job growth. So we can see in the middle set of bars, the number of jobs in the region has increased by 150% over the last 40 years. You can see on the right then, the number of housing units has only gone up 116%, and the population has gone up 74%. So jobs are up by 150%, population's only up by 74%. Where are all those people in those jobs? Well, there's a variety of things going on, but some of them are living outside of our region because they can't find housing here and commuting in. We presently have about 250,000 people who live outside the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area, which is a big region. It's bigger than it's different than the COG region. It's 22 jurisdictions in suburban Maryland, the district, Northern Virginia, and 1 jurisdiction in West Virginia. So we have folks coming from south of Fredericksburg and south of Spotsylvania. We have folks coming from the Eastern Shore. So we do have this issue of faster economic growth or faster job growth than we have had housing unit growth over the last 4 years. And just one other picture to sort of illustrate what's been going on here over the last few decades is the shift from renter to owner when it comes to production. So this is the stock, housing stock in the Washington metropolitan area back in 1970. In the Washington region, there was roughly an equal number of rental and owner-occupied units. And over the last 4 decades, for a variety of reasons, some of which have to do with federal policies related to making homeownership attractive and promoting homeownership, the number of owner-occupied units has far outpaced the growth of renter-occupied units over the last 40 years. So more recently, I want to talk a little bit about what's happened in the for sale side of the market, and a little bit about what's happened in the rental side of the market recently. As Jeff mentioned, we have had a housing market that has recovered much faster than other places. We we may sometimes forget that there are other places that are still in a very different point of the recovery of the housing market than we are. But a lot of places saw a picture that looks very much like this over the housing boom and bust. What this graph shows is it shows the change in inventories of homes for sale, so that like the active listings. And so you can see it's from 1 month in a year compared to the same month the year before. So you can imagine if you're around 0, it means in September of 12, we would have had the same number of homes for sale as September 2011. And we'd expect it to go up a little bit over time, but to hover around 0. So you can see that back in 2005 and 2006, at the height of the housing market, inventories skyrocketed. People listed their homes on the market, people were seeing people make a lot of money on their houses, and supply of homes for sale increased dramatically just as demand was starting to ebb, as people were seeing prices get more and more expensive, and they were saying, well, maybe I'm going to hold off on homeownership. And then we saw prices fall dramatically over time. What's been happening recently has been a pretty significant drawdown in inventories of homes for sale. We're 22% lower in August than we were last August. And inventories in the Washington area, inventories of homes for sale are at historically low levels, upwards of 6,000 homes fewer for sale than we would have in a normal market. So again, this issue of supply and demand, folks looking for homes to buy are finding an increasingly low supply of existing homes. We'll talk about the new home market, which hasn't been contributing to the inventory until very recently. So this chart then shows what's happened to prices over the last, in this now 12 years. This chart keeps getting bigger and bigger. So, and you can see the green bars show annual price appreciation. So back in 04, 05, 06, where we had double-digit price appreciation, home prices were 22% higher in 2005 than they had been in 2004. You can see then what happened in the bust, where you had month-over-the-year changes in home prices. That is, prices in January 2009, for example, were 24% lower than in January 2008. That's how to read that red bar. So we had a pretty dramatic drop-off in prices, but we had a pretty quick recovery. In the Washington metropolitan area as a whole, we've had price appreciation for 32 out of the last 36 months. So for 3 years, nearly 3 years, we've had prices being edged up. We are now in many places back to very close to peak levels, where other places around the country are just now starting to see price appreciation. And we've had this price appreciation because of a lack of supply, a supply that's being drawn down, and relatively fast job growth, so people demanding housing, which has continued to put this modest, somewhat modest, single digit, but certainly constant pressure, upward pressure on home prices. As a result then, there are some places where home prices this past summer were back to peak. Okay, so it's a little bit tricky to compare September, this 1 month's worth of data, to the peak price. But what I'm showing in the first column is, it's selected jurisdictions in the Washington metropolitan area, and the peak price is listed for each jurisdiction. And it typically fell sometime in late 05 or 2006, depending on the jurisdiction. It may have been 07 in Montgomery County and Prince George's County. And so what you see then on the last column is the percent of peak. So in September 2012, the average sales price in the District of Columbia was 90% of where it had been at peak. And so you can do the math and figure out that it was a little under $600,000 for the average price of a home, including condominiums, by the way. These are condominiums, townhouses, single-family detached homes. For another example, for Arlington County, while they're at 88% of peak in September, in July their July figure was 100%. Their July average sales price was 100% of peak. It was over $630,000. So I say that, and it's interesting to go around to other parts of the state. You talk about other parts of the country, but when I bring these numbers to other parts of the state, to Charlottesville or to Richmond and they see these home prices, they are flabbergasted. And I think that even those of us who live here, we see that we're back to this place where affordability is a really critical issue at a time where so many other regions are faced with continuing declines in prices. So this is where we stand. On the rental side then, what I've pulled off is a figure that we typically use to talk about rent burden, and using data from the American Community Survey, showing the percentage of renters in these selected jurisdictions who pay 30% or more of their income in rent. Basically half of the renters in our region pay 30% or more of their income in rent. And that has been something that has become an increasing share over the last few years as vacancy rates have fallen and rents have gone up. And you can see that it's pretty typical that it's suburban Maryland, Northern Virginia, the District of Columbia all see these rent burden levels. So we have this demand that has been generated by relatively strong job growth in the region, and at the same time we've had a significant drop off in the supply of new housing. So this is a 3-month moving average of building permits. So basically what it's meant to do is show trends in building permit activity. You can see back in 2010 we were at historic lows in the number of building permits. We've seen a rebound over the last couple of years to some extent. In 2011 there were about 15,000 building permits issued in the Washington metro area. The 20-year average is something like 28,000, so we're still far below long-term average. And the types of residential construction that have been put on the ground, by and large, have been multifamily, rental, inside the Beltway. So that's what we've been seeing driving the new residential market. Only recently have we started to see some activity in the single-family market in the further out suburbs, in Loudoun, in Frederick County, Maryland. We're starting to see a pickup in permits for single-family activity, but by and large, the activity has been in multifamily and in rental over the last few years. Okay, so looking ahead a little bit, the Center for Regional Analysis last year completed a study linking regional economic development and housing needs. So basically trying to highlight the importance of a sufficient supply of housing to ensure the economic growth of our region. And as Michelle mentioned, I get to share the results from this study with many groups, and I usually share the 20-year forecast, where over the next 20 years, between 2010 and 2030, the region's expected to need nearly 750,000 housing units to accommodate job growth. So I'm showing you the nearer term forecast. So in this case, 8 years, or between 2010 and 2020, in order to keep pace with the jobs that we're expected to see here in the region, we're going to need nearly 408,000 net new housing units to accommodate our new workers, assuming all of the workers live in the region, so that traffic doesn't get any worse and our transit capacity is able to be met. What you can see here is, and I'm happy to answer questions or talk with you individually about how we came up with these numbers and where these assumptions came from, but given the characteristics of the new workers, given the wages that their jobs will have, when we look at the types of housing they're going to need, it's going to be about 40-60 single-family, multifamily. 40% single-family, 60% multifamily, which goes directly to what Jeff was talking about and to what the Coalition for Smarter Growth has brought us together to talk about, is this need for thinking about how the demand is going to be met by multifamily, by housing in more dense locations. Just by contrast, the stock right now, while the need is 40-60 single family, the stock is 67% single family, 33% multifamily. So 2/3 single family, 1/3 multifamily. Again, when we look at need, so the pie chart on the right breaks down the price points. When you look at the demand from new workers, and you can see there's this significant demand, again, based on household sizes, based on wages, for housing at the relatively lower end of the owner-occupied side. The left pie chart shows the current. This is sales data from the MRIS. So, for example, 15% of the market is $600,000 more houses, 6 and 5% is what is needed based on these demand forecasts. Now, I don't mean to suggest that this need, this what's demanded by new workers, suggests that all this is new housing, that we need to try and figure out how to build new housing priced under $200,000. We know the restrictions on the possibility of doing that. What it highlights is the importance of identifying and preserving existing housing that's affordable at some of these levels, and to use this as a guide to suggest that there's this general pattern of need that tends to fall a little bit on the lower end than what we're seeing in the current stock. On the renter side, I think the situation is similar here, where you see that over half of the rental housing that these demand forecasts suggest we'll need is really priced at levels that are affordable to folks below 80% of area median income. And you can see that the demand that we see ahead for high-end or more luxury rental units is very small relative to what the current stock is, and frankly, what some of the current housing that's under construction is. So I leave that just as a food for thought, where we have only looked at the housing that's needed to accommodate the net new workers that are coming to the region, approximately 1 million net new workers over the next 20 years. That number, that 731,000, that 750,000 new housing units, doesn't count the number of new units that will be needed to accommodate replacement workers. So if you think through, there's 1 million new workers over the next 20 years, there's 1.8 million replacement workers. People coming in to fill jobs when people retire or leave the workforce. Some of those people who retire will leave the region and free up a housing unit, but some of them won't, right? Some folks will stay in the region and stay in. So there's a demand for housing that's even greater than what these numbers suggest, but it's a place, I think, to start. So in conclusion, I was asked to give an outlook, which when you're asked to give a near-term outlook, it's always dangerous because people can find you and say, well, you said, I can, to 2030, come find me in 2030 and see if that's right. But I think it's pretty clear that the regional housing market has been recovering. Everything we see, though, despite the continued sort of stabilization of prices, it does indicate that in the near term, in particular this fall, that sales activity and prices are probably going to soften. There's a lot of uncertainty in the market. Folks are waiting to see what's going to happen with the fiscal cliff, with some of the tax reform and with the presidential election. And so prices then and sales activity are going to soften in the near term, even as inventories probably get drawn down as people keep their homes off the market on the for sale side. Then in the spring, it's kind of a let's see what happens kind of thing at this point. My boss, Steve Fuller, says that I don't remember what the word he used. I don't think it was clowns. That sounds too mean for him to say, but that in Congress they'll figure out how to not make us go off the fiscal cliff here in January, that they'll come to some sort of decision, some sort of conclusion, such that that $1.2 trillion in cuts that are anticipated on January 2nd will not come to fruition. However, what that probably means is more uncertainty, right? Because they're not going to decide anything between now and January, but they may push something off. And for our housing market, that probably means more uncertainty in the housing market, more people unsure about buying and selling, and sort of a little bit of limbo maybe as we go into the spring. Rents actually may not grow as fast as they have been over the last couple of years because of the amount of new supply that is coming online. Back in the spring, I think the numbers suggested something like 4,000 rental housing units under construction in the District of Columbia alone, more than they'd ever seen on the ground at one time. And so in some markets, there's a level of supply that suggests that vacancy rates may go up and rents may stabilize or not increase as fast as they have in the past in some markets where we've been seeing construction activity. Our job growth over the next 5 years, which we do anticipate here in the region, even with our sort of transitioning economy, our restructuring of our economy away from as much dependence on the federal government to a more diversified economy, will put upward pressure on home prices, and they will be, as Jeff suggested, in places that are close to transit, in employment centers, places where people are looking to be closer to their jobs, to be able to have shorter commutes and so on. As we look at these numbers, I think that it's hard to argue that we need more 4,500 square foot single family houses. I think that there's this shift in demand to smaller houses. And there's this need for folks who are interested in housing to think about how that type of housing will come about. The demand is there for multifamily, the demand will be there for smaller housing, and particularly on the rental side. And I do want to leave you with this thought that, we were talking about how to talk about housing. There's the moral issue, there's the health issue, there's the environmental issue. And I think that it's really important to talk about the relationship between our economic vitality, right, our goodness as a place to be, and how a lack of a sufficient supply of housing can put that economic vitality in jeopardy. If there's not a sufficient supply of housing so that workers can live where they can get to work in under an hour, then employers are going to start to look for other places. They come here because we're a really great place to be. We have a very highly educated labor force. We have lots of great cultural amenities. Austin has a really highly educated labor force. Okay? Places that are, Seattle has a really highly educated labor force, and they have housing that's less expensive, and they may become more attractive to economic activity. So I think that to maintain our quality of life here in the region, thinking about housing in addition to all the other things that make us a great place to be is increasingly important. This report is on our website. We also recently completed 2 studies of the regulatory process, actually getting to this very issue of the uncertainty that is affiliated with the residential development process in the jurisdictions around the Washington metropolitan area. And we did focus on Montgomery County and Fairfax County, and I invite you to check out our website, and if you have questions about it, please don't hesitate to give me a call. Thank you very much. I feel like I ran over a bit, and I apologize, but thank you very much. I look forward to the conversation.
Thanks so much, Lisa. My name is Cheryl Cord. I'm the Policy Director for the Coalition for Smarter Growth, and wanted to just walk us through the next part of the agenda. I know you folks have been sitting here not being able to ask questions yet. We're now going to go to our panels, where we're going to have panelists discuss programs and challenges, and then have that be a good opportunity for everybody who has a lot to contribute, I know, to this discussion, for you to ask questions and to get into dialogue with the panelists. So David Bowers, the Vice President for Enterprise Community Partners, is going to lead the first panel discussion looking at inclusionary zoning programs, and if the panelists can come up and sit up here. So David can introduce the panel. Where's David? Oh, there he is. David is a stalwart in the business of housing and affordable housing, and I think he can do a great job drawing everybody out and make sure we have a really robust discussion about these important issues. Oh, and also I just want to encourage people to grab coffee and food. There's lots of coffee and food. Sneak out, want to keep you alert and engaged.
Many thanks, Cheryl. Alert and engaged, those are the key words for Monday morning. It's good to see everybody here this morning, and thanks to the host, COG and Coalition for Smarter Growth and Northern Virginia Affordable Housing Alliance for bringing us all together. So we will jump right into it. You've got, I'm a firm believer in shorter than longer introductions, particularly when the names, the titles, and the bios have all been provided. So we are very pleased this morning that we do have Gilles Stucker here from the DC Department of Housing and Community Development. As you see, Chris Anderson from Montgomery County from their MPDU program, and John Payne from the Department of Housing and Community Development in Fairfax County. So the way we're going to flow this morning with this, and hopefully everyone picked up outside, there's an overview sheet of the inclusionary zoning ordinances in Washington, D.C. It was at the registration table, because this is something you can actually, I think, refer to, might be helpful as you are hearing some of the presentations. So what we've asked the folks to do, I'm going to ask each person, we'll start off and kind of break this up into a brief discussion of the basics of the programs that they run, some of the policy issues around income targeting, compensation to developers, terms of affordability, subsidy recapture, sharing. Again, a lot of that's outlined on the sheet. To speak a little bit about the administration of the programs, how applicants are recruited, qualified, placed, how are units monitored and enforced, resold, how developers, owners are educated and assisted, and just to give us a little insight into the program performance. How is the program performed in terms of number of units produced per year and over time, income levels, etc. And again, some of that information is really right on your one page. But we've asked each panelist to maybe take 5 or 6 minutes to hit on that. Then we'll get into some market and policy issue questions that we'll float out to the panelists to speak to get into, and then the goal is for us to leave the last 20 minutes or so, 20-25 minutes, to open it up for Q&A here. So we're going to try to push through until about 10:45 or so, and then we'll work to open it up to you all to really make it a dialogue with folks for the last 20-25 minutes. So John, why don't we start with you from Fairfax County, and then we'll go to Chris, and then go to Gilles, and again, we'll ask you to take about 5 or 6 minutes.
Thank you, David. pleased to be here today. I just have a quick question. How many developers do we have, for-profit developers in the audience? Well, okay, thank you, appreciate that. Fairfax County had one of the first programs. We originally lost our situation in the General Assembly and then came back and found a compromise with the local development community. But inclusionary zoning is really so important an element of working well with the development community. And I think one of the more difficult things that we're probably dealing with today is the changing environment of what's being developed and how it's being developed. The other thing I'd like to just sort of say right off the front is Jeff's earlier comment about viewing the community as a whole and what is it that we want to come about in terms of getting there is a lot different, and probably the Tyson's model replicates that in so many ways in terms of really coming together as a community, defining what needs to be there in terms of it being a complete functional community, and then how do you go about getting the groups of people to acknowledge that there needs a diversity of housing. I guess I would just start to say that there needs to be more discussion around that topic, because zoning, we talk about inclusionary zoning, but I think what we really have is exclusionary zoning because of the economic development factors that are leading a lot of our zoning initiatives. So being a suburban community, the ordinance originally started out as a zoning ordinance situation where you could get a 20% bonus density. And this was great in these large communities that were being developed in suburban where they were primarily single family, that we did in fact include some type of unit that could be more affordable. We've had to amend our ordinance about 4 or 5 times. Our ordinance, if you go online, is easily accessed through the zoning ordinance in the general requirements section of the zoning ordinance. And it will show you just 20, 30 pages or more of complicated requirements. The bottom line is we've been able to produce about 2,300 units, I think probably roughly 1,300 for sale units, about 1,000 rental units. Our program initially started off at 50 years. It was reduced to 15 years, and then it went back to 30 years. And so right now our units are 30 years. What we've also tried to do is have a recapture situation in terms of whenever a resale is in place, we can actually put a more extensive covenant back on the properties so that the Redevelopment and Housing Authority actually purchases the units and puts a new covenant on for 30 years. We do have a number of 15-year units that are going to come online to go out of the program, and we're trying to figure out exactly all the implications of that. But that's a significant number of our for sale units. The general principle behind the original ordinance was that you get a 20% bonus density and you provide 12.5% of the units, total units you build, would be affordable. It had to be changed again at one point because we had multifamily issues with parking structure costs. And the concept, if you realize the bonus density was countering the cost for building the units themselves. And we basically set up a pricing initiative where the price of the unit was theoretically absent land cost. That land cost has kind of grown into land development costs a little bit more, but we because of the discrepancy between the for sale units, I mean, we may have market units in townhouse communities that are $400,000 and our units are selling for $150,000. So clearly it's a little more than the land, and entitlement is a big part of that. One of the things that allowed us to adopt the Affordable Dwelling Unit Ordinance in Fairfax County was the support of the development community. And again, going back to Jeff's earlier question, it was the predictable aspect of it that really made that what they wanted to do. They knew they needed to provide some different type of housing for other individuals to live in the communities, but in one jurisdiction, one magisterial district, it might be zero, and the other one it could be $100,000 per unit or whatever as a contribution. And so they wanted predictability, because predictability then factors into their land costs and also into their long-term profitability. So our income served is 70% for home ownership, 65 and 50% for rental. We also have gone into the workforce housing, which is a little bit different animal, because originally we worked with the zoning ordinance The workforce housing is actually done as proper conditions as part of a comprehensive plan change. And the whole Tyson's area was based on that. And that situation, again, what we're finding is density is not the critical issue, but the responsibility to provide other forms of workforce housing or affordable housing is part of the community's expectation. And so in Tyson's, as an example, we now have, countywide, we have a 12% requirement for workforce housing near transit when comprehensive plan change takes place. But within the Tyson's area itself, it was moved up to 20%. And it's interesting because right within a quarter-mile radius of the transit areas where the density is unlimited, the expectation was 20 period. As you move further out, you actually got some bonus density for these increases. But it was, the expectation is when the density is unlimited, that's the bottom line we have to provide. Our ordinance, our workforce ordinance, at least in Tyson's, is encouraging creativity and sort of recognizing the fact that it's not always easy to implement in terms of high rises. And therefore, they can download them into other parts of the community. So this is all a work in action, but I think what is really important from my standpoint on all the programs as we move forward is that we make sure that we're cognizant of the market and recognizing the developer's ability to provide these units and work with them completely to help define what is really a win-win for both situations.
Okay, thank you. I'm Chris Anderson. Green light is on. I'm Chris Anderson. I've administered the Montgomery County MPD program since 2005. Do you think, as the chart shows, our program was adopted in 1974, and I like to say to people that you think after 30 plus years you'd have gotten all the kinks worked out, but I have to say that one of the most challenging parts of the inclusionary housing is that there are constantly new policy issues that come up. Every week or couple of weeks, we're presented with a situation that we've never had before. And it's kind of amazing. You get to put your thinking cap on and your policy hat on again and figure out how you're going to deal with some of these situations. Our director is sitting back there, Rick Nelson, and I know we bring him a new issue every couple of weeks. I think that he's tired of seeing them, but I just think it comes with part of the game, and I think that's part of what Montgomery County has recognized over the last 30-some years is that the key to a successful program is adaptability and flexibility. The issues are never going to be the same. The market is never going to be the same. I like to say that when I started to administer this program, I had a full head of full long hair, and that the issues have caused that, but that would be a lie. But I have to say that I had the benefit when I took over this program of having a staff person who worked in the program for 20 plus years, and I lost her to retirement this summer, and it was a great loss to the program, but I often relied upon her institutional memory to kind of put things in perspective. And she would tell me that during the 80s, when the Montgomery County saw a huge boom in growth in the 1980s, and at that time, the difference between a moderately priced dwelling unit and a market rate unit in the same subdivision was only $20,000 to $30,000. In the 90s, as the market prices started to grow, that gap started to grow. And finally, when I took over the program in around 2005, you would often see that the MPD was a third of the price of the market rate unit. So that demonstrates there one of the big differences in the program. Of course, as the chart also shows, we lost a number of units in Montgomery County over the years. The program has produced over 13,000 units, and only about a quarter of those are still under some sort of control. Now, if you add in the units that the Housing Authority has bought over the years, the Housing Opportunities Commission of Montgomery County, that number is somewhat greater. There are actually some more units under control. Probably about a third of the units are under some sort of control. But that fact led the county to do a very serious reexamination of the program in 2004-2005 with county council staff. undertook that. And as a result of that, Montgomery County instituted some big changes. For example, when this program first started 30 years ago, the control period on an MPDU was 5 years. And after 5 years, you were free and clear. There was no shared profit. There was nothing. And then over the years, that changed to the point where we went to 10 years, 10 years repeating. And now in 2005, they adopted a 30-year control period, 30-year repeating, basically infinity. So the same with the rental side of the market. That was started at a 10-year rent control, then it went to 20 years, and now it's up to 99 years. So that was all an attempt to address the changing conditions of the program, which was the loss of the units. They also started to apply the MPD ordinance to smaller developments. When the program started, it applied to developments of 50 units or more in the county. Then it went down to 35 units, and then again in 2005. Montgomery County is running out of land to develop. There are a few large parcels up in Clarksburg, but there are some infill opportunities. But we're starting to see smaller and smaller subdivisions coming in of 35, 40 units. And so they also reduced the size of the subdivision that the ordinance applied to down to 20 units. The percentage of units has stayed the same over the years, from 12.5% to 15%, with a sliding scale. And there's also a sliding scale density bonus that goes with that. Now, at 12.5%, which is the minimum required, there actually is no bonus density provided. But there are other development incentives, such as flexibility in how the subdivisions are designed. So that is one feature of the program the development community often has problems with. I don't know how that applies in yours. They automatically get a development bonus at the minimum, but in Montgomery County that is not the case. And so I would just, I'd like to give us enough time to have a nice discussion. So I would just say that, again, adaptability and flexibility of the ordinance is very important for the long-term viability of the program. And the issues that you're going to be facing are change continuously, especially in this region, as it faces the challenges of sustainable development. More and more people wanting to live closer into the city, and the lack of land and the price of the land. So I will just stop there, and then I'll be happy to answer any questions that people might have at the end of the opening statements.
All right, my name is Shiel Stucker, and I've been involved with IZ in districts since just before the admin regs went into effect, which means IZ truly becoming in effect in DC. There's three parts to IZ in the district. There's zoning regulations, statute, and administrative regulations. Started off in 2006 with the Inclusionary Zoning Act, and it took about 3 years or so for the admin regs to get into effect. IZ is mandatory in DC regardless of whether or not you take advantage of the bonus density. And it's split between two agencies doing the administration. When the application of the building permit comes in, the zoning department determines if IZ applies, and we take on the responsibility of moving that forward through administration. The neat part about our agency is that we also oversee the zoning commission planning and developments. So those started in 2002. Also through the deputy mayor's office, all their dispositions of affordable housing units, through our other divisions in our agency and through council. That all started in 2009. So we're seeing a perspective from all the different local affordable housing programs, using that to make sure the IZ program hopefully is administered the best it possibly can. The basics of IZ in district are that it's for the life of the project. It's 8 to 10% bonus density. You're going to have the units split between 80% and 50% AMI. For the larger multifamily, it's all 80% AMI. And for the smaller developments, it's 50 and 80 split. Also, it depends upon if you're stick built or concrete, steel built. Also, your overlay district, certain areas, Georgetown, historic Anacostia, and others, it's exempt from IZ because it's outside the fold of the historical value of the neighborhood, and also the zone in which you're in. So certain zones, or low residential zones, obviously IZ wouldn't apply, largely because you can't build that big anyways, because the threshold for IZ is 10 units or more, or if you're expanding the shell by at least 10 units or more, roughly. So what we've seen in the district over our short period of time, it's been into effect, 3 years now, is that there was not a lot of development when IZ first came into effect because we were still getting out of the downturn. What we are seeing is a lot of development that is IZ applicable, that has other public financing. So one of the first adaptations we did to the program about 2 years ago is we did an adaptation that would not apply the IZ administrative process if you're receiving funding from another source. So for example, you're receiving CBG money, that administration will apply to the project, and that will, as long as you're making the affordable housing available at or below what IZ requires, you create affordable housing, which is the key. How it's administered is we felt is secondary. And what we're seeing now is some issues with FHA, which is, I think, an elephant in the room for us and for most folks across the nation. And we're working out those issues now. Went before the Zoning Commission about 2 months ago, and we're going back in about 2 or 3 weeks to continue the conversation about how to resolve those issues. So one of the things that Jeff brought up earlier was the change in prices and how that's really, over the near term, how that's changed as it relates to the AMI. And what we've seen in the district is that we have relatively high prices in most wards of the district, but it varies. And that the IZ prices, in large part, have been, in developments that currently are being built, are well below the market. And in the affordable units that are the corollary units that came to the Zoning Commission, had some actually really unique scenarios, particularly in Columbia Heights, where these units that were built in 2004, 2006, were sold at very low levels. Their neighbors had bought at market at very high levels. When these folks now are going to sell, the market rate folks are taking a very large hit, but the affordable units are actually, they're making money. And that's always going to ebb and flow depending on the market. We found it's very interesting that we're still, because we see not only the policy side, we also see the administration of the units. We do resale prices, we do the lotteries for new folks coming in. That it's a very, DC is a very dynamic place, and it's good food spot. And how we look at our policies and we adapt our policies. So I want to sort of back to allow for discussion.
That's great. Thank you, gentlemen. A couple of questions. I'll have to kick us off, and then we'll open up the floor in about 10 minutes. The issue of pricing has come up in comments by a couple of folks. John or Chris, Gilles, any of you want to take a stab at how the trends and kind of the current realities around housing pricing have affected and impacted the IZ unit absorption issue?
Sure, I'll try to take that. Two things. One, when the downturn took place, there was a lot less production. What we saw was a lot less turnover in our ADU units, our affordable dwelling units. Where the market was, the foreclosure market hit the most was probably the next step for a lot of our inclusionary zoning people to move to, so some did do that, took advantage of the foreclosure properties. One of the dynamics of inclusionary zoning that I think is difficult to manage is the fact that you have several cross purposes. You have the public purpose of trying to provide affordable housing, and you have it trying to provide it for long term. And then you have the, in the for sale model in particular, you have trying to encourage home ownership. At the same time, you're restricting equity growth and sort of a free market situation. So you're giving an advantage in the front, but you're causing a little more control when they're about to resell and not getting the full equity value of a property because it is a controlled situation. So those are some of the factors that we're dealing with. aspects at least.
I'll address it from a Montgomery County standpoint. In Montgomery County, the for sale MPDU units are priced under a methodology that was developed a long time ago, and it's based on the theory that a developer should not lose anything and hopefully can gain something on providing an MPDU. So the for sale cost is theoretically the cost of building the unit, and we have certain price standards and such, and that apply, and that has worked fairly well under the horizontal development model that has been predominant in Montgomery County over the last 30 years. But as I mentioned earlier, as the developable land dries up and as more and more infill and higher density development occurs, especially around metro stations, we're going to be getting into the situation where we're going to have more and more high-rise development. And unlike, I don't think Fairfax, for example, applies their MPU ordinance to high-rise. And because they recognized when they designed their program that it's very difficult. It's not just it's not just the cost of the units, but it's also condo fees over time. It's very difficult to control those. It's difficult to control the growth in condo fees. So we are going to see more and more high-rise development, especially in areas like Wheaton and especially, I should say, in White Flint, which has recently seen a huge upzoning and a redevelopment, a master plan redevelopment area. So we're going to have to address and solve the issue of condo fees. Now, I know some jurisdictions have done that by going to an affordability price model, where the condo fee is rolled into the household's monthly housing cost, and then based on what they can afford to pay every month, you back into a sales price. I think the district has done that. I know jurisdictions in California have done that. We studied that issue in Montgomery County, and we didn't quite get there. But at some point, if the MPU program is going to be successful and households are going to be successful in those high-rise units, we're going to have to face and solve the condo fee issue. So if anybody has a solution out there,
John,
I'm all ears.
I was actually going to ask John, out in Fairfax, have you all dealt with that issue, the HOA fees, condo fees, amenities?
Typically, we try to underwrite it within our ADU program. Workforce housing, we haven't actually accepted any for sale units, but it is a different model in the sense that the economics of the workforce housing are at 80, 100, and 120 for sale. And in Tyson's area, of course, they're the other lower tiers as well. But that is a very, very hard issue with the condo fees. One of the things that we're trying to do is on the workforce housing is base it on incomes as opposed to a for sale price, so that the builder can effectively build to sell it at what the market conditions will allow him at a certain income. It's going to be an interesting test, I think, of a lot of issues, but we felt like that was a better situation than trying to define the cost associated with a high-rise. One of the more difficult parts of this, and this gets to sort of what is the market and everything else, is what's being built out there for the most part are these podium buildings that are 1 and 2 bedroom units. And so that limits family size, and that really does target a different income range. It doesn't take care of families really. And the condo fees are heavily enriched. They may be initially somewhat low, but if you go to any of the new condominiums units in any of the urban areas, the technology generation expects the screen TV telling them where the UPS package is, and the putting range on the top of the roof, as well as the bar with the outdoor TV and fire pit and all that. And you roll that into amenities, that becomes a condo fee, and the cost of living starts to excel. So I think what we're going to see, unfortunately, in this area is there's a lot of multifamily in that model being built, and it's going to hit, where are all these people, because they're competing for the jobs in the areas, but we're not going to see the type of housing that needs to be for the construction workers with 2 or 3 children, and that's the bigger problem, I think, in terms of our inclusionary zoning and attitude. This goes back again to Jeff's model. What we need to do is really we need to define what the community needs to look like in a wholesome way, as opposed to a specific market trend that's taking place at the time and place, and really try to forge the community's needs in an economic way as well, because that's all that goes back to the transportation and everything else. Kind of long-winded there.
No, that's great.
For the district's prices, it's basically a choice right now, two options. Is when your building permit gets approved, there's a certain price schedule that we publish annually that you can take advantage of, or when the project is completed, what the price is for the IZ unit. So we want to make sure that developers, when they're actually doing the construction, can put that into pro formas. We also want to make sure that at the tail end, when they actually finish the construction, if interest rates have gone down or there has been changes in the market, that those can be set into the sales prices. We do include condo fees into our initial sales prices of our units. And also as a backdrop, in the district we have obviously very strong rent control law. We also have a very strong condo conversion sale law. Those have been in effect for many years. So in large part, the rent control was from 1985 going back. For the rental units that are newly produced in the district, this idea essentially is making those new units also affordable. And it's a tough question of the condo piece, but we try to do our best in the beginning to make sure that we do it correct. We do 50 cents per square foot, which is in our price schedule published annually. If there are major changes, for example, if you have that putty green or you have some major concierge service or something in a unit, you can't have off-site compliance. So that's an allowable, because we want to make sure that the unit is affordable to the person who's in who's buying. So for our program, if it's a rental, if the individual who's buying can't spend more than 38% of their income on household cost, and for sale, it's 41% household cost. That's income to household cost. That's the comparison.
John and Chris, you all talked a little bit about some of the adaptations that have been made over the years on things like control period, threshold size, the building to impact. Right now, here as we stand in 2012, are there any changes that are being looked at, or any other additional adaptations that have been made recently, or that you all are looking at now, given the changes that are taking place, or the realities in the market? And Gilles, maybe, I know DC's is still newer, but are there any kind of lessons learned that the district is looking at from the past 5, 10, 15 years that you haven't already spoken to, that the city may be looking to implement as it relates to lessons learned from other jurisdictions? But John and Chris, any kind of new things that you all are looking at in terms of adaptations?
I would say that under the MPD program, we're really not looking at any major changes right now. However, I should mention that we also have a workforce program that was adopted a few years ago. Initially, that was a mandatory program. Now it's a voluntary program. And the county also requires the developers to provide both MPDs and workforce units whenever they enter into a joint development with the county. For example, we have county land, and we put out a request for proposals. Developers come in and partner with us. They are required to develop workforce. And I would say that we are looking at, because it's a new program, we do have one workforce development under our belt that we have developed. And based on that, we're looking at certain issues that came up. For example, as John mentioned, we also have 3 pricing and affordability tiers in our workforce, because there's a much broader range of incomes you're looking to serve, from 71% to 120% of median. And so we have three price points, and we started to see that, we started to implement it at the same time that the housing prices started to come down, as we saw earlier. And so we started to recognize that maybe our top price point was getting very close to the market rate in some situations. And if somebody had a choice between purchasing a 20-year price controlled, fairly complicated to explain unit versus just going out on the market and finding something, they were opting to go after the market. So we're looking at that and trying to decide whether we need to collapse some of our prices and our sales prices under the workforce program. But I would say that those are mostly in the policy discussion stages, there haven't been any discussions of legislative changes.
I think we're constantly sort of reevaluating where we are and what we're doing. Since we've made all the ordinance changes over the years, we found that we have some redundancy in the ordinance just to make sure that everybody, you tell them 3 times, maybe they'll hear you kind of thing. And so you will find sort of things repeated throughout the ordinance. And then certain elements apply and others don't apply, depending upon when you came into the ordinance. So we've been talking a little bit about simplifying the ordinance and putting more of those changes in the regulations that we run. The regulations are put together by the Redevelopment Housing Authority. The ordinance is a Board of Supervisors requirement, and then the board has authorized the Redevelopment Housing Authority to sort of be the administrative arm of that, and the Department of Housing, which is the sort of board's agency that works with the Housing Authority. So it's a very complicated process. The other thing we're looking at are, simplifying things with our homeowners, making sure that education is foremost in them getting into the program so that they understand what needs to be done. And as a result, we're going to be looking more at simplifying, I think, the message to them, to what their expectations are, and what they might be gaining by being in the program. And of course, we're looking at how can we do more inclusionary. Just as an example, and this is sort of off the tangent because we're really talking about zoning kind of situations, but the Housing Authority actually, the Board of Supervisors actually bought a property in Reston that was scheduled for redevelopment. And they're acting sort of as the conduit to make sure that inclusionary zoning is incorporated in the redevelopment of the community. That's sort of another way of, we often don't think about it, but local housing authorities buying properties and making sure there are alternatives within the community for living at different income levels is also a form of inclusionary housing, maybe not zoning, but at least ensuring that. So this goes back to leveraging the private land, the public land that Montgomery County is talking about. That's another way to get it in place. So it's not always through totally the zoning ordinance, but it's also through that.
Just briefly, in the spring, we requested comments to our admin regs. So we're currently reviewing those for our first major iteration of our IC program. Those will be moving forward.
Sure. 2 last questions before we open it up. One, deeper affordability. Has there been any look at, how do you achieve potentially deeper affordability through the IC programs? Anybody want to take a stab at that one?
We'd be glad to. One of the things within the Fairfax County's ordinance that allows the Housing Authority to purchase up to 1/3 of the for-sale units, and that's a pretty significant situation. At different times, it's appropriate. Different funding sources need to be available, obviously, to buy these. To get to the lower incomes, to the 30% incomes, you have to substantially underwrite the cost of the unit, even when they're affordable dwelling units. And that has been a vehicle for us. We did some very early on that were actually public housing units. A lot of controversy surrounding that, but nonetheless, it took place. And most people would walk into the community 20 years later and not know their public housing units or any other kind of units other than home ownership. That's what it appears like. In fact, arguably, some cases, the ownership by the Redevelopment Housing Authority ensures a higher level of maintenance than perhaps a homeowner who is on a little less budget. And that's an ongoing concern for us too, in terms of maintenance and long-term sustainability of units as we keep them in the program longer. The quickest way is through a Redevelopment Housing Authority actually purchasing the units and then subsidizing them with either federal funds or local funds. In fact, we do bring in housing trust fund money, which is generated generally from properties that are rezonings which are less than 50 units. We typically get 0.5% of the total finished development cost of units built in that development, and that helps us then invest in other properties where it's more appropriate.
As John mentioned, the Montgomery County ordinance also has a set aside for the Public Housing Authority and also for nonprofit housing providers. So that, and as I mentioned earlier, the Housing Authority owns and it operates as scattered site public housing, about 1,500 units. So that really is one feature of the ordinance that allows it to reach lower income families than would ordinarily be served, because we'd like to stress that this is a home ownership program for moderate income people, and everybody is required to qualify for a mortgage, make a monthly mortgage payment. They can apply for certain closing cost assistance, again, through the Public Housing Authority offers those types of programs funded by the county. Well, one other feature that allows lower income families to be served, for example, is we allow other programs to be used to provide MPUs. Well, for example, you can use a low-income housing tax credit project, which has lower affordability levels, to meet your MPU requirement. And so we would count that as MPUs. So that's one other feature that can be used.
You brought up a point that actually led to the last question, the recruitment and qualification of home buyers. Has that changed at all over time? And if so, what have been some of the more recent changes on that for Chris or John?
Well, one of the things we realized a few years ago is that we really did need to increase our education piece so that families fully understood the opportunities, but also the requirements of the program. So we've increased the number of education classes that families are required to go to. They have to go to a general first-time homebuyer class. Then they have to go to a class that specifically explains the requirements of the MPD program, both the opportunities as well as the long-term requirements. And I think that has had that will have a long-term benefit in that our enforcement actions will be fewer and far between, I hope, which I can discuss more about enforcement later on. But so we really do believe that education is a very important piece of the program, and we've really put a great emphasis on increasing that.
I think with the web, we've been able to really market a lot to the individuals. We do require them to be pre-qualified in terms of education to assist. One of the more difficult things is sometimes people will, when their name kind of comes up or whatever, they'll be more cautious about buying a used unit as opposed to waiting for a newer unit in an area. And I think one of the more difficult aspects of just the general market of the ebb and flow of ADUs is they may not be in the neighborhood that the kids, the children are in, and so there's a reluctance sometimes to move to an area not knowing how close they are going to be to their child care provider or their educational situation, or in many cases the jobs and transportation issues. So those are challenges, I think, that are probably more influential on the low moderate income purchasers than some of the other purchasers.
That's great. Well, we've got about 25 minutes before we wrap up. Open up to questions. One, Mike Schroyer from the Commonwealth of Virginia.
Thank you. I was going to bring this up to home ownership session, but I thought maybe this would be appropriate too. As speaking as a lender, we are encountering more and more difficulties, and Mr. Stucker mentioned FHA issues probably on the single family, but on the multifamily side, inclusionary zoning that has the ability to survive foreclosure is becoming more and more of a problem with lenders. Now you might say, well, just don't let it survive foreclosure, but that's a policy discussion in terms of long-term use of the units be there in perpetuity. But also a lot of communities have significant investments in the financial investments in the properties, and therefore to just say that they don't survive and then that the money is gone is poor public policy, and it's a problem. And I don't necessarily have all the issues. I think on the single-family side, Montgomery County may have made some progress on that issue. I'd be interested to see with FHA. Because right now in Fairfax and in Loudoun and other Virginia jurisdictions, you cannot do an FHA loan with inclusionary zoning because they survive foreclosure. Some lenders are doing a one-off. We're concerned that the terms on some of those loans may not be as good. Some lenders are flatly saying we will not do them, and we're in that problem position. So it's more of a question for everybody. That's an issue that I think it's going to become more and more. 5 years ago, nobody cared. Well, we're in a new world now. Thank you.
Chris, John, anybody want to take a stab at that, or anyone in the audience have some feedback on that?
Well, we confronted this issue last fall. I think it probably started around this time. our director, again, Rick Nelson, who's here, really took the bull by the horns and went directly to HUD and raised the issue because we were being contacted by our builders. And of course, our builders are our partners in this program, as John mentioned. And so there was a great concern that we had approximately 30 people who had signed contracts who are now going in for their loans and had been told that they were going to get an FHA loan, and then suddenly FHA said they were not making these loans anymore based on a regulation that was, gosh, almost 20 years old. And suddenly they discovered that there were some controls in our program, and they announced that they were not going to make any more loans. And so we worked very hard at contacting the FHA commissioner. I think Rick probably cornered the Secretary of HUD at one point at a conference, and there was a series of conference calls, letters, emails back and forth, talking with the FHA staff. We were able to get a waiver for our program. So people are able to get FHA loans, but I have to say that the survivability beyond foreclosure is a huge issue for HUD. Our program, we release the covenants at foreclosure. I know other programs don't do that and are very hesitant to do that, but in subsequent roundtables with FHA and getting some correspondence from FHA, that to me looks like an issue that they're not going to budge on. So I'm not quite sure how programs that want that to survive, which of course is a very laudable goal, until someone can get it through FHA that is a workable and valuable goal. Everything we've ever heard from them is that they are not going to budge on the survivability of the covenants beyond foreclosure.
Well, I guess we grabbed the wrong bull, is all I can say. We have our waiver in. We haven't heard back yet, but certainly this is an issue not just for us in Montgomery County, but nationally it's an issue. And what would be the situation that HUD would ensure that there was affordability? So it's just a little confusing to us, I think. We're working through it, doing our best with the lenders that are available and working with them, but I think you'll probably have more discussion about this in the latter sessions.
Chris, I just want to make sure I'm clear. You said the county received a waiver to allow it to do what?
For lenders to make FHA insured loans to MPDUs in the program. Single family.
For single family, okay. Other questions? Did I see a hand over on this side? Let me start here and then in the back. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'd like to ask Chris, what did they waive exactly?
Well, they actually didn't waive anything. That's a wrong word to use. They approved our program, I guess is the correct word. They didn't issue any waivers, and I don't know that they formally issue waivers. What they do is they review the language in your law to make sure it meets their 1994 regulation. My understanding is that they are working on a letter that, I don't know, again, if the word waiver is correct, but they are working on a guidance letter where they are going to issue more specific instructions, and they seemed willing that they were going to actually sort of lighten up their interpretation on a few issues. But again, the question was specifically asked at a roundtable we went to at FHA whether they would look at the foreclosure and surviving issue, and that did not appear at that time. Their lawyers wouldn't let them say aloud, but that did not appear hopeful based on some of the reactions that seemed to be received.
Yes, ma'am.
I would like to ask Chris Anderson about the workforce housing. What is the length of affordability on that?
For homeownership units, it's 20 years. Repeating. That means that if it's sold during that 20-year period, a new 20-year control period starts. And for rental, it's 99 years.
Yes, sir. Go here and then to the gentleman there. Yes, sir.
I had a question for John Payne. John, you mentioned that in the Tyson's Corner area, that the new high-rises and the density being provided there, that there's some, let's say, flexibility in allowing the provision of the ADUs in maybe lower density buildings nearby. Can you describe that? I wonder whether that might not be an answer to the condo issues and the high-rise costs.
Well, I think that in the big view of Tyson's Corner, they recognize the deficit for housing. It was such at a level for affordable units that anything that was somewhat walkable within the transit areas or to other job opportunities would be fine. They also recognize that another way to subsidize affordable housing is through low-income housing tax credit projects. Pretty difficult to do within a high-rise. So there could be some out parcels within the area of the Tysons that were smaller and could provide either a podium where they could actually do combined into a tax credit project. So there are a few units within the Tysons area that would be described as moderate income, and so there was also consideration of finding a way to make some of those could be either purchased or leased on long term to ensure affordability in those units as well. And the other part of that is where there are units that are affordable, there's a one-to-one replacement, in theory at least, that they would be required to, if they tear down units that are currently affordable, that they would replace them on a one-to-one basis. So these are all within the comprehensive plan, but it gets back to the flexibility issue with the development community. And it also would help a great deal with the amenity package condo fee increases that would take place in the unit. So.
Tyson's no longer a corner. Yes, sir.
In order to preserve a good partnership with the private sector, the MPG law having a law saying if the unit is not sold within or rented within 90 or 120 days, it can be sold or rented to somebody over income with the same restrictions applying. Is that, and this was used, I know, in the late 90s and 90s for some of the high condo fee deals that nobody could buy the units, but this process was used. I refer to it partly because the first couple of units in the district that came down, I understand, were not sold for 9 months. And I thought that was very impressive for the developer who was sitting on a fixed, a completed unit who could not do anything with it. It was tied up in the FHA thing also. Chris, for you, primarily.
Yes, Ted, that still is the feature of the program. It's kind of a relief valve for the builders who try to offer it to income-eligible people in the program, either lease or sell the unit in 90 days. But at the end of 90 days, the developer can request permission to open it up to the general public, non-income restricted. All of the requirements of all of the restrictions on the unit still apply. And we still require those buyers to come in and get education on the program because some of our enforcement issues in the past were on non-MPG purchasers who purchased MPG units. But that is a necessary relief valve for the builders, and I think that helps give them some peace of mind that they're not going to be sitting on units, they're paying on those units. They're lending. Lenders are still demanding payment for the loans on those units. So it is kind of a relief valve. And it's used, we didn't have to use it very often in 2006, 2007, but I'll be honest, when the market dipped, there were several builders in Clarksburg who had a large inventory of units where we had to open up some of the units to non-income eligible people. Now we're starting to see that change. We're starting to see fewer requests like that. More and more units are being bought by people in the program.
Shields, can you say a little something about the tenor of the conversation in the district around that issue? Because that certainly has been a flag. You hear that kind of people talking about units not moving, and kind of what the tenor is on the city government side about how to address that.
Well, in large part, FHA has been an issue. We've also found that credit scores of individuals have been difficult. The first units we have are for sale. So while we have folks who are income eligible, we have folks who are not financeable to get a mortgage. And that's been a difficult area of concern for us. Particularly with the downturn, people may have experienced a bankruptcy or some kind of loss. So that's been a concern of ours. And that's in large part why we're looking at making adjustments to our administrative regulations. How can we address some of the concerns that may be part of our program that can actually get resolved through adjustments to our rules.
I think I saw Jessica's hand in this gentleman here. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I was going to ask Montgomery and Fairfax about how they generate, what do you do to make sure their families are there for the units when they do come online? Is there some kind of marketing strategy you use, or over time that people just know about it, that they come and ask, or how does that happen?
In case anyone didn't hear the question, I think the question was how do the jurisdictions ensure there's pipeline for when the units come online?
We've been very, very fortunate in having a strong pipeline. We market a lot to our county employees as well. It's a really, I mean, that was how a lot of inclusionary zoning was originally talked about in terms of firemen and teachers and policemen, and although bus boys and chefs and everybody else deserve an opportunity for it as well. But so when we are getting a little tight for opportunities, we have a 10,000 person workforce as well as some equivalent teacher workforce, and we bolster those web information sessions and try to get that. One of the more difficult things I think that we're all facing, and I don't know if Montgomery's facing this directly, but as the units stay in the program longer and their incremental increases go up, we're going to hit a plateau where that 70% median income, people can't qualify because of the price, even though it's a controlled price. And that's more of a concern to us because the second part of that equation is longer units stay in the program. If the individual isn't investing properly in remodeling and taking care of the roof or the other issues, then there's a large amount of money needed at the turnover of the unit, which increases this cost as well, or they may be not prone to reinvest because of limited equity growth that they get. So that's sort of a bigger issue for us in thinking out into the future what some of those issues are going to be, and to ensure that the units stay affordable as well as that there are a number of people available to purchase them.
Historically, we did not have to market the program very aggressively, other than also to county employees and other public employees in the county. A couple of years ago, we saw the number of interested families dropping off, and we thought that could be due to several reasons. Families were having difficulty getting financing. Some people were having second thoughts about becoming homeowners after what had happened in the real estate market. And also, we thought that there might be competing units out there as the prices were dropping and there were more foreclosures, short sales going on, things like that. There might be non-restricted units out there that families are opting to purchase rather than coming in again and purchasing a price-controlled unit. So we are looking at strategies for marketing, which will also include email blasts to public employees. We do that with our workforce program. When we launch a new workforce project, since it's specifically aimed at public employees, we have, again, several thousand county employees, plus we make the information available to the public school system and other public agencies in the county.
Yes, sir. We'll go here. The lady here. Yes, sir.
Question for Gilles. With regard to the income group survey, can you explain the application of the 50 to 80 AMI split for low rise and only the 80% AMI for the high rise?
No, that's I'm on the regulatory side, so my job is to make sure that the policy is taken through. That was through a long discussion with the zoning commission when it came into effect. Unfortunately, that historical knowledge I don't have the best knowledge of.
It is refreshing in this town to have a government representative say, I don't know. Thank you, sir. Anyone in the room by any chance know? By any chance? Yes, Cheryl Court.
The history of it was that we looked at the Montgomery County. The question was, why we have the income target split that is in the DCIZ program. Is that correct?
Well, why is there a 50 to 80 split for the low rise and only an 80% for for a high-rise?
The short answer is because low-rise is less expensive to build and therefore more feasible to create more affordability. And in fact, it has a higher yield. It has a 10% set aside, splitting half the units at 50 and half at 80% AMI for low-rise. And for high-rise construction, it's an 8% set aside at 80% AMI. And that's done based on economic models or like sort of a general pro forma of those construction costs.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
I would be interested in hearing from the panelists about structured parking and whether this has been something that has been an issue with IG units and how you address that.
Question around structured parking and how that's been addressed.
In Fairfax, we actually changed the density ranges for structured parking. We have one range for under 50% in multifamily and one for over 50% in terms of what the density bonus is versus the number of units provided. As an example, I think it's you get a 17% bonus density for multifamily with less than 50 units structured, 50 units of structured parking. And you have 6.5% affordable units. If it's over 50%, then it's 5% affordable units. So it recognizes the cost differential. And this gets to your question, quite frankly, because our affordable dwelling unit is targeted at 70% for sale purchases, which is why we went to the workforce housing. When you get into high-rise, you've got the dual costs. You've got the cost of the unit going from the wood frame construction to concrete, which is anywhere from 20 to 25% more. And then you've got the cost of structured parking, which could be 50% more over some combination of structured and grade parking. So those are the reasons that the Tyson's workforce came about with the range at a higher level of 80, 100, 120, and then recognizing that there still could not be, I mean, in Tyson's the density is so intense that they wanted to get some 60 and 70%. And because of the work of the Northern Virginia Housing Alliance and others on the panel, they really sort of pushed that in at the end and everybody agreed with it, and it was a big help. Michelle Crocker could tell you a little more about that, which I think she's about.
I think the alternative strategies that Patrick talked about of allowing developers to kind of take some of those units and redevelop them outside of the quarter mile, still within the 1,700 acres of Tyson's, allows maybe affordable housing developers who use tax credits to get more units at those lower income levels. You know, the requirement for Tyson's is still fairly high. There's a small percentage that serves people at 50% and 60% of AMI, but the bulk of the requirement is from 80 to 120. So we tried to develop strategies, and there's a whole series of them that, frankly, we can't give you the history or how it's working because the implementation of Tyson's is so new at this point. But we're hoping that we have created some tools for the county to use to entice development of lower income units that serve people at lower levels with some of these other strategies of pulling these units and aggregating them in places that are not so close to the metro, maybe in lower rise development that'll be less costly.
I saw a hand over here. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I was going to ask Mr. Stecker, and I don't want it to make this such a concern to me, but I'm a retired teacher, and I happen to be a homeowner in Arlington County. And when you talk about designated at the 80% and 120% of income, any conversation I've had with Arlington County officials, when I say, what about affordable housing for teachers? And they say, oh, no, we cannot designate housing just for teachers. How do you do it, since you're in Virginia?
I think that's for John. Okay. Yep.
Well, we don't actually do it just for teachers, obviously. Depending on funding sources, once you're in the federal funds, you really cannot have a preference. If you have private financing, in some situations you can. And that there are some entities that just do it by targeting populations that they're actually trying to attract to their properties, which you can do as well. But The examples are often defined as this is the income range of people that you want to target. And as I said earlier, our chairman of the board said, well, you know, yeah, I want our county employees to live near our government building, but you know, the guy working at the coastal restaurant, I'd like him to have an opportunity as well. So from a holistic standpoint, it's the whole community, but it helps to identify that people targeted at those incomes don't have those opportunities that some others have. So, especially in the initial beginning of their careers.
Thank you. We're going to give our last question comment to the man who's been identified as the bullfighter, Rick Nelson from Montgomery County.
Thanks, David. Pardon me. I have a question partly for Lisa, really, and the rest for the panel, and that's related to family occupancy of units in transit-oriented development. And you're seeing a trend for it. And the question for the panel is, are any of you thinking of steps to take to encourage 3-bedroom or more in your IZs? I mean, for instance, in Montgomery County, where we're clearly 12.5% per unit, we're looking at maybe considering whether it could be by bedroom count or some other means, because I'm afraid that we're not going to get the 3 bedrooms in those kinds of developments.
For the district, it's the units have to be evenly dispersed among the project. So if the project is building 3-bedroom units, there will be some IZ units that will be 3-bedroom. But it really depends upon what the developer sees as the market conditions, what are most makes sense for him or her, and those are the units that get produced as a portion of the whole.
We have not targeted families. Again, we typically have followed with the developer, but I'm in full agreement with what Jeff was stating earlier, that we need to start to define these communities of what we expect them to be. Tyson's is certainly making room for athletic fields and for potential school sites, and so the expectation, I think, is that there will be children there, but we're not maybe sort of helping it along by defining how many 3-bedroom units we have. And it came to mind when Lisa was doing her presentation, you know, maybe we should say to the Chambers of Commerce, look, this is the type of housing you need at any of these Tysons or at any of the other transit-oriented development areas. And well, how do we go about getting those percentages before we start talking about what we rezone it to? You know, so I think that this is informed, helps us inform our decisions.
Lisa, did you want to add a piece of that?
Well, you know, and I think Jeff probably has something to say about this too. When we look at the data, we don't see a big emphasis of families demanding multifamily housing right now. We just don't. What we do see are the related issue of delaying of marriage and childbirth, so that you have more people demanding multifamily for longer periods of time, people staying single, staying married without children longer. I think it's an open question about whether we're going to see a big shift in families living in multifamily. And I for one, don't think it's something that is very near term, frankly. And I don't know if other people are seeing something on the ground, but when we look at the data, we don't see a big shift.
So that'll be the last word for this panel piece. Can we give the panelists a big hand?
And so, again, if you just want to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your work and give us a framework, and then get the panelists speak.
Good morning. So we're going to spend the next hour talking about inclusionary zoning from a home ownership perspective, which just naturally means we're going to start talking about mortgage financing. And we've got practitioners from both sides of the table to help us do that. I'm going to get us started by providing a general overview and then talk about some common problems. And I want to make sure we end with plenty of time for questions and answers. So we've got Dave Wilkinson here, the Executive Director for City First Enterprises here in the district. Vicki Gall, the Associate County Attorney in Montgomery County, and Deborah Watson from Bank of America. So to introduce myself just for a moment, I work for NCD Capital Impact. We're a national CDFI, and our main work in affordable housing right now is the Cornerstone Partnership. So many of you may know my colleague Rick Jacobus or have heard of
this online system that we're getting started called Homekeeper. The cornerstone is our peer network for affordable homeownership programs across the country. We provide assessment tools, a document library, direct technical assistance, and then that program administration tool that we also will start using to collect impact and benchmarking data for the entire sector, which I think is an important part, actually an important tie-in to mortgage financing. As we talk about affordable homeownership and mortgage financing, we just see this mismatch between the supply of lenders and loans to the demand of home buyers and programs. I think on the lender side, sometimes there is uncertainty about the home buyers that are going to come to them through these programs. There's varied understanding of how these programs may or may not conform to the secondary market that we have, and how those lenders then feel about that non-conformability. And I think there can be, and I don't want to call it inconsistency, but that there are differences enough between programs in an area such as we're in, between program requirements, again, the types of borrowers, that it's hard for those lenders to get the volume that they need. Right? So home lenders need some sort of volume really to make their lending work. And I think on the program side, the elephant in the room has been acknowledged with the FHA problem and the issue of restrictions surviving foreclosure. I would also add to that the requirement that most programs have, or I hope they have, around a notice of default, so that if a homeowner goes into default, there's a notice given to the program associated with that unit. And it's my understanding that a lot of lenders actually have difficulty providing that notice, which is a pretty important way for programs to retain that affordable unit. So I've asked folks up here this morning to talk a little bit about how programs can make it easier for lenders, so how on the practitioner side we can get more consistent. We can be presenting the same thing to lenders over and over again, and how lenders can make it easier for programs. The default notice, a single point of contact, a legal framework, so programs can understand quickly if loan documents are going to meet what lenders need. I would also, I have a couple ideas for solutions, but I'll bring those up later and let Dave get started.
Great, thanks a lot, Ann. So I was invited to be here to discuss our lessons learned producing and selling permanently affordable housing in the Washington, D.C. market, and the homeowner perspective of attracting lenders and what we've done to achieve that successfully here in D.C. City First Enterprises and City First Homes are the nonprofit partner of the city, of the District of Columbia, operating the city's new workforce housing program that's based on the community land trust model. The program is similar to IZ, especially in the terms of the deed restrictions, the issues faced with lenders, and with attracting borrowers. So City First Enterprises is the nonprofit bank holding company of the CDFI Bank and City First Bank here in DC, and we're an incubator of community development solutions. We did the research to launch City First New Markets, which is the largest new markets tax credit funder in DC, and also City First Homes, which, as I mentioned, is the city's partner implementing the workforce housing program, which is focused largely on transit-oriented development and families largely between 60 and 120% AMI. Our average AMI is about 70%, and you can see some of our assets and accomplishments there. So we got into this because we saw a major challenge in DC, that working families are increasingly priced out of home ownership. And this is a simple graph showing the average income needed to purchase the average home in DC and the average income of workforce families. Lisa from GMU had even more compelling stats about working families being priced out. And as we see it as the as home prices rise faster than incomes, if you're providing subsidy as a government, you're having to chase the market without some affordability. And so we looked for sustainable solution. The Mayor's Comprehensive Housing Strategy Task Force, the first one, recommended the city create a permanent affordability solution based on the community land trust model. And we were selected to establish that program a few years later, and we've been creating units for about 2 years. We looked at the best practices of CLTs around the country, community land trust around the country. Again, similar to IC programs, but typically run by a nonprofit or a nonprofit partner of the city. And we created a program that balances permanent affordability with wealth building. Our model is based on the nation's largest community land trust in Burlington, Vermont, which has been very successful in terms of wealth building as well as to maintain affordability over time. And that's an important thing from the home buyer's perspective is, how much am I getting out of this? Am I left stronger than I was before, notwithstanding the deed restriction? So 75%, based on this model, and studies of this model, 75% of homeowners who had previously been locked out of home ownership. Renting was really their only option, with the exception of deed restriction programs like this. 75% of them go on to buy their next home on the open market. And so that is an important element that's been useful for us in the marketing perspective. Also, the program was designed to work with the private sector, to work with private developers, private finance, including mortgage lenders. And we also work very closely with home buyers. We're very serious about home buyer support, and that's a major reason for the successful outcomes in the rates of foreclosure that we've seen with community land trust or other stewardship models around the country. And our home ownership support includes standard things that you see typically, home buyer education classes in particular, in addition to standard home buyer education, educating in the terms of the deed restriction, so that folks know what they're getting into in the beginning and how it works. But also a lot of support in the daunting process as a first-time home buyer of attaining a mortgage. The mortgage market rates are low, but it's very difficult, as folks know, and home buyers find this very challenging. So we really help them walk through the process with partner lenders that we have. And we also have substantial post-purchase support, financial plan, what we call preventive measures like financial planning, group purchase discounts, home repair classes, as well as emergency support, calling families the day they are 31 days late on their mortgage payment. And they know us because of our ongoing relationship, and so they're more likely to answer the phone for us because they know our home support specialist, David, and when he calls, they answer. There's a great relationship there. And there's also personal relationships, so when they feel they're getting in trouble, they can call us and they know that we can help design programs to help them get them back on track. This is a quick map of some of the units that we have funded. You'll see largely in the Green Line corridor, we focus largely on gentrifying areas and transit-oriented development. So where are we today? We started creating units about 2 years ago. We have financed 79 permanently affordable homes. Of those 79, 48 are completed. And of those 48 that have been completed, 40 have been sold or occupied. 2 more are under contract now. So the big sort of point here is that we've been able to successfully sell deed-restricted housing in the District of Columbia, and that has been a lot of work in figuring out the market. So we're going to share some of those. Right now we have about 120 pipeline units. We've deployed about $4.8 million in city funds and leveraged that 2-to-1 with philanthropic and mission-oriented finance dollars. And that ratio continues to grow. We were selected for a White House Social Innovation Fund Award together with NCP Capital Impact with funds matched by the Ford Foundation, one of 10 shared equity housing programs selected nationwide for that award. and so we're very proud of that. And the program has gotten positive recognition in the media and in partnerships with national organizations. One of my favorites is just a couple of months ago, we had a house featured on HGTV's House Hunters. It was a foreclosure response that we fixed up, got into great condition, and showed beautifully on HGTV. Everybody saw that. More recently, we've become, because of some of our success on the ground here, we've become involved in the policy world. With our regulator, the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond, we designed and co-sponsored an event at the Federal Reserve Board of Governors a few months ago. Some of you were there at that event. And that was co-sponsored by NeighborWorks and the Ford Foundation on Shared Equity Finance, and we're now coordinating a national working group on Shared Equity Finance. So we have experienced success in DC, and we see IZ as a kindred cause, and we're very excited about its potential here in the district. We've taken a look at the challenges of the new IZ law faces here in DC. We know that DHCD has been working hard to attract partner lenders and has done a very strong job given the limitations that they have within the law and regulations our program didn't face. And through our experience creating and selling permanent affordable housing in DC, here are some of the challenges that we faced in launching a new program, and they're the same challenges we think that IZ is going to face. We've already talked about lenders rejecting deed restrictions, surviving foreclosure. We also find that lenders require substantial technical support, but there are challenges beyond the lenders. With the sales, there can be substantial fallout of low and moderate income home buyers. We find that they require substantial hands-on support pre-purchase, and then, you know, and so we have our own servicer who is able to tell us the day that they're late. In some cases, we provide subsidy for housing where there is not a second mortgage. In that case, we will frequently charge a small fee, monthly, what we call a monthly land trust fee or monthly stewardship fee, homeowner support fee, is how it's referred to in different markets, a $19 monthly fee. And if that $19 monthly fee isn't coming in and it's targeted to be at the same time as their first mortgage, then maybe they have paid their first mortgage and not their $19 fee, but they're going to be unlikely to pay their $19 fee and not their first mortgage. So that's another sort of canary in the coal mine indicator, and so we're able to contact them that way.
Thanks. Questions from the audience?
I'm sorry, Vicki, I think you brought up one of my big concerns about the mortgage letter was the return on capital improvements. My understanding is that that's wide open, even if the value of those improvements has diminished to basically zero. The homeowner is still entitled to full reimbursement for those. Has anybody sought guidance on that? Because I think that could potentially really gut the affordability.
I was trying to find the provision about that we wrote in the proposed letter. You're talking about whether or not they have to get full compensation for their capital improvements. Let's see, I'm sorry, I had it out earlier, but basically what it was it sort of I won't use the word loosey-goosey. I'm going to say flexible kind of provision that would allow the affordable housing unit provider, they would be required to provide the base. Now, I don't think that they're required to ensure that they get the base. What they're required to do is draft it in a way that they're able to get the base. In other words, we don't have to protect against market failure, okay? And what it would also provide is that there be some rate of return. And because the community land trusts were having an issue with a one-to-one ratio or some sort of compensation with the capital improvements, that could be an option. In other words, that could be in the formula for the resale compensation to the owner, but was not required. That's how we drafted the provision in our proposed mortgagee letter, so that you would not be required to give compensation for the capital improvement, but that could be part of the equation. Does that answer your question?
That would be a good resolution. My understanding from other jurisdictions is that it's a very broad definition. They're expecting compensation.
It's difficult. I have to say in Montgomery County, we do give compensation, but I mean, you have to show it. And if you're, if your ceiling fan's 10 years old, there's probably not much compensation you should be getting for it. But we do give compensation in the resale price for capital improvements. But I understand, especially for community land trust, that becomes more problematic.
So we do that. We provide that full compensation for the current value of lending.
Was there another question?
I was going to ask Bank of America, if you're not willing to do a lender notification, which seems to me would be in your own best interest if somebody can intervene and save you the time and the money or tracking down this borrower. However, how would you react to the first right to purchase? I mean, if that's a requirement in the covenant or in the deeds, would you respond to that?
Yes, at Bank of America, we're fine with the first right of refusal. No issues with that. Again, we just don't have the ability. We have the system constraints to be able to flag a single loan, to be able to notify a third-party provider of default. We just don't have the capability to do it. But the right of first refusal is fine.
In the back?
I'm wondering if there are two different types of issues. There's the issue of qualifying a new home buyer having access to an FHA insured loan, and then there's the issue of surviving foreclosure. I'm wondering just in the first issue, if a place like DC would be able to get the same kind of exemption we're talking about that Montgomery County has received. I mean, and just as a test case, is that an easy thing to obtain? Could it happen in Washington?
So, Ms. Franklin or Shields might be able to better answer that question. I know that it is, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, that it is the intent, DHCD staff is working incredibly hard on laws that they are charged with implementing, and they have seen the challenge of the surviving foreclosure and are actively working through the challenging process of lifting that barrier to accessing mortgage lenders. And so Jill might go to you a little more.
That's right. We went before the zoning commission about a month and a half ago and got emergency language put into the zoning regulations that allow for the restrictions to go away with foreclosure with notice provisions. So we're going back again in about 2 weeks to have a further discussion with the zoning commission and on these issues. We're actively engaged in addressing the concerns.
Right. So in terms of your question of how hard or how easy would it be for an institution like the District of Columbia government to achieve an exemption from the local HUD office, which happens to have in Philadelphia, they've decided it's easier to change after looking at this for a significant period of time, and despite some internal opposition politically, they've decided it's easier to change the DC law than to get an exemption from HUD, and my sense is that that's exactly the right way to go.
Unfortunately, it's not a law that has to be changed.
Right.
In this case, we only have to go to the proposed zoning, which
So,
makes it infinitely easier to manage. If we had to get a statutory change, it would never happen.
So these are entwined. So the issue is the surviving foreclosure for allowing a home buyer to access an FHA loan up front. Is that?
I have to say that in Montgomery County, the things that we were flagged, as I suggested, this condominium, the issues that they were concerned about had to do with appreciation and value, and most especially what would be deemed appropriate remedies if people were not using the unit as an affordable housing unit. That's sort of what tripped us up. And so we didn't get a waiver, an exemption, or anything else. What we did was convince HUD that both the language of our law and the manner in which we enforce it is appropriate and is in compliance with their requirements. And, you know, it wasn't easy. It took almost a year, and I know for HUD that's a, you know, record speed. But we did not have, and I'll repeat, we did not have the issue about the covenant surviving foreclosure. And I don't think that that's an issue that's going to go away. I mean, really what you have here is a balancing act between a lender being able to ensure that at foreclosure, they're going to actually have some buyers who want to bid on that property. Buyers are, you know, at foreclosure are a rare breed anyway for the most part. They're usually investors. And if the investors see that their return is going to be substantially limited by these requirements, there's going to be an issue. Now, you know, I'm not saying that there aren't ways around that, but that is the market fact. And so if you have those provisions in your covenants, I think you're going to have problems for a long time.
It's an excellent panel, and I thank you for your comments. I just want to put my commercial in again. This is also a multifamily rental problem. It's not just single-family home ownership. These same issues impede the ability to do financing in some cases.
Right. So I'm having a little trouble as I sit here. So I think I heard this really great story of how we can get how practitioners can get loans with financial institutions that are ready to do that, and so there are lenders ready to lend, and yet what we hear from practitioners everywhere is those lenders aren't really there. And so if there are other practitioners out there who want to, or maybe the two of you who want to kind of say that's true, and it's good, and it's again because of the secondary market, it feels like it's some of the problems. So sometimes I dream about creating a different secondary market. And that sounds maybe a little, I don't know, is that heretical or wild? But I think the money might be out there. I think there might be lenders out there who could be convinced, and whether it's lenders or other institutions who want long-term money, who could be convinced that these mortgages are in fact good, safe investments, as practitioners know, as they've talked about a little bit. Your slide is there, my slide is there. As some of the records of foreclosure show. And I think I know of at least a couple servicers out there who are able to provide default notices.
Well, I think that's a great idea. We're mostly talking about the barriers for FHA, and those are very difficult, almost intractable. We have found Fannie to be a friendlier environment, but it is also becoming more challenging, and we happen to be an affordable housing provider that's also a federally regulated bank holding company, so we understand how to talk to financial institutions. It is probably more difficult for a small nonprofit affordable housing administrator to get those types of partnerships. We have 8 lender partnerships. It can be difficult for municipalities to do the same things. It's difficult for your municipality to have special exclusive relationships with certain lenders, et cetera. So a separate secondary market for a model that's proving to be very successful. You know there's demand, you know there's scale. You can create mechanisms where there's lower rates of foreclosure. Seems to me it would be a rational move. And there's folks out there like Self-Help that have multi-billion-dollar secondary market for affordable housing generally. It could make sense.
Have we solved this issue? Sorry, go ahead.
Debbie Watson, I thought said, was it that HUD requires that it build something I didn't understand the first right of refusal question, because you said, yes, you don't have a problem with first right of refusal, but then I thought there were HUD restrictions related to first right of refusal back to the original, to the housing provider.
I might not be aware of that HUD guideline then, but I know that we do allow right of first refusal I might need to go back and read that mortgagee letter myself.
Yeah, I mean, first right of refusal seems like if you could resource that, then that's a really good resolution.
Yes, if it is a HUD guideline, then we wouldn't be allowed to do it. Because, I mean, at Bank of America, it is all about secondary marketing. We are going to sell all of our loans. We don't have any portfolio that we hold our own loans.
We have the first right of refusal, and I've never thought that HUD did not permit it. What there cannot be is any barriers to the mortgage lender recouping their investment. And so you have to carefully craft that to ensure that the mortgage lender is going to get what it is that they put into the unit. And so there's no ban on that for FHA financing. You just have to be careful how you do it.
Well, without further questions, I think we are at time. I hope this has been a thought-provoking conversation for both.
Thank you very much. Thank Anna and all the panelists for joining us. And what I'd like us to do is we're going to invite Michael Kelly, the Director of the Department of Housing and Community Development for the District of Columbia, to come up and just share some remarks with us. And then what we're going to do is we want to invite y'all to stay for lunch, but I think rather than a formal breakout group, we'll just invite you to come back here and continue this conversation informally. But we hope folks can, if you can, stay for lunch. So Director Kelly?
Hey everybody. All right. Hello. Boy, what a incredible talk. I'm glad we fixed it, right? I'm glad that it's no longer an issue. But, I mean, it's a little Liz, right? If we did somehow a big net that can catch these very small instances of foreclosure. And we can go home and high-five each other and just take this thing to scale. Well, on behalf of the mayor of Consistency, right, it's an honor to share with you just a couple thoughts. And again, it's like coals from Newcastle. Sometimes I meet a group and it's like, okay, what am I saying? Let me start with a thought. An old college professor of mine, a guy named Sam Davis, he teaches at the University of California, Berkeley, wrote a book called The Architecture of Affordable Housing. In it, he was joking that the first chapter would be one sentence: move out of California. I think that's one of the issues I think we have here, obviously, is left on its own devices, the invisible hand would make diversity and inclusivity very much impossible here in the district and in the region. So again, I welcome the camaraderie, and I welcome the vision, leadership, and will that we have to ensure that this area stays on the cutting edge. Again, you know the importance of this, the scarcity of it. You all know what's going on at the federal level now in terms of increasing the amount of dollars available for us who toil in the vineyards to create this valuable resource. We all recognize the economic and social impact that affordable housing has and inclusivity has, and we recognize that this housing has immediate impact on employment access, educational access, social support, and quality of life amenities. Something in the spirit of social justice, it's not okay in my book for those that have to have access to all this good stuff and those that have a tough time competing in the private market not have access. So I think that puts government in a unique role of trying to level the playing field and making this scarce resource available to everybody. Just a quick rundown of the resources that are available in the district and in the region and kind of how it fits into the topic here. We're looking at tools that include the Housing Protection Trust Fund, something that takes a percentage of recordation taxes from sales here in the district and makes it specifically available to developers, to both nonprofit and for-profit, to do gap financing, pre-development work, et cetera, to pepper deals. And that's an important part of it. The idea of embedded in that particular critical needed resources, it isn't 100% government paying for something with the expectation of 100% being low-income housing. The idea is that there's mixed income, and ideally mixed use and mixed tenure as well. The Department of Housing and Community Development actually went through its first super notice of funding ability last spring, and with the awards, and we've now been able to leverage about $28 million worth of federal and local dollars into about $150 million worth of housing, which translates into about 700 opportunities that we didn't have. So again, what that does talk, though, about is, again, the peppering effect of having inclusion as embedded. The districts were blessed with 7 Hope Sixes, actually a lot of it under my tenure when I was here the last time around, and again, embedded in that whole philosophy is not just mixed income, mixed finance, but also the idea of community support services to help empower those residents that are part of a larger village so that they can compete. A lot of times if you're living in a totally sort of distressed public housing with a whole bunch of social relays, you go into a mixed repositioned development and you find that your family's now having a tough time socially blending in and socially competing. So one of the tenets of the Hope 6 effort was this community support services, which indeed is part of the district's new community efforts. Like San Francisco, we're one of the few areas that are looking at having a locally funded Hope 6 for to say it in short terms. Or I guess the department speak right now is the choice neighborhood, which really talks about things going beyond just housing. How do you create neighborhoods that have diversity, inclusivity, but also represent areas that embrace education and job development, et cetera. Berry Farm is one in which I think the developers just met last week. It's just on the other side of the Anacostia River, and it represents the next big effort that the district is going to be doing in terms of creating affordable housing in its larger footprint of dirt that it owns. Incredible amount of dirt, by the way. There's McMillan Reservoir, which is on Michigan and North Cap, a giant area, which is, again, going through opportunities in Walter Reed, stuff along the waterfront. These are all major projects that without government intervention, there could be just invisible hand in the market stuff going on, and Lord knows what the rents and the pricing would be. But most importantly, those that can't afford will not participate. So I think the topic du jour, and I want to, again, the most important thing I want to do is to thank the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments for convening this really important effort. And my 2 cents really is just to kind of rah. This is really important, and recognize that the government does have an important role. And I think it sort of not just begins with the ownership and how you deal with the dirt, and in this case, how do you deal with the expanded developable envelope, but how do you look at providing also taxpayer resources, both federal and local, to help make these families successful. Again, I think one of the things that's going on, just to share with you, if you don't know, that the district is going through a comprehensive housing strategy task force plan as we speak. An interesting sort of subset that's occurring right off the bat is that it's not just about supply. That, in the old days, my dinosaur days, it was about how do you advocate for more funding to create more housing for affordability. Well, now it's recognizing that need will never meet with the supply that's available to us. So the question now becomes, how do you provide job opportunities, and how do you look at moving the dial so that there's a nexus between jobs and housing. And one of the early studies shows that the available options that families have that are in that 0 to 30%, not just double when you go from 30 to 50%, but they quadruple. So as you start to move the dial about household income, the opportunities for folks greatly increase, and that you can actually now look at that kind of layering of economic interests, not necessarily by creating housing specifically for that particular family, but helping to have that family have access to jobs and opportunities to increase their family worth and wealth so that they can actually have other choices or greater choices. On, obviously in terms of inclusionary zoning, we're looking at income integrated communities. And again, I think when you start to look at the stuff that we're doing and the stuff that's coming out of the ground right now, we have almost 1,000 units of housing that's being teed up. And so this afternoon, this morning's discussion is really critical to ensure that we lay the foundation for the financials. But it's also a recognition, obviously, that if we're going to really make this inclusion, if we're really going to fight sprawl through higher density in the inner city, if we're really going to make this thing work, there's got to be a win-win situation. There's got to be a recognition that the development community can't be just held to standards with a gun to their head. There has to be recognition that their needs be met. There has to be recognition that there's clear and simple goals that coming into the game so things don't change arbitrarily. And a recognition that, talk about that, the sort of, Dave here always recognized the three elements of sustainability. It's like green with the financing, with the social content. It's a recognition as we look at inclusionary zoning that there has to be a balance that goes beyond just the transactional exercise. What are we looking to do in terms of visioning to ensure that that site is successful, not only when we cut the ribbon, but a generation after that? One of the challenges, obviously, I think, as we look to do these things, is sort of the one group that's looking at building wealth through equity. God darn it. And here's a house, and I need to have a piece of the American dream. My family can now benefit. My kids can pay for college, etc. If there's equity that's built into this deal. Then there's the other equal and opposite side of folks saying, hey, no, this is critically needed taxpayer dollar. And if this house is made affordable and someone actually cashes out at some point, then it's no longer affordable. And so how do you balance that? How do you balance the philosophical challenges of trying to uplift families and their personal economic development, at the same time ensure long-term affordability for that unit? I don't have an answer, but I think that's one of the challenges. that goes right after the secondary market question. At the other note, I think we're also dealing with is marketability. In its current state, the developers are building like crazy here. 0 1s, maybe some 2s, and the families that that was sort of like the advocacy community that brought this tool to the district's attention is one that was looking for dealing with families that need 3 bedrooms, maybe even more. And so how do you look at that kind of disconnect between what's being built and the availability of what's being built and what the actual needs are for families versus young individuals or young couples? I can go on and on about what happens when a young couple have babies, et cetera. Right? And they're dealing with this a lot right now in terms of my new job, in terms of what is fair and how do we look at the big picture. I think that it's again not necessarily a question of, it's not really a question of can we do it, we are doing it. I think the question for us all and the challenges which today's forum really starts to lay the foundation to is that it cannot, in my opinion, it can't be a one-size-fits-all. That question about long-term affordability versus family equity, you can't have one answer to it. There can't just be one answer to what happens in Tenleytown in the district and what happens east of the river and Anacostia. That different places have different market conditions, have different cultural, social conditions, and that as we start to tweak and make this program, this incredibly valuable program, more effective, clear, and more sustainable, there's also a layered responsibility for us to look at the nuances of what happens in the counties, what happens in the district, what happens within the neighborhoods in the counties and districts, and so that we can actually get to a point that we can have this program successful for everybody without necessarily killing it because we have a one-size-fits-all model. I know I presented more questions and answered them again, in fact, at Coles and Newcastle. You were the ones that could be giving this talk, not I. I just here in my role as cheerleader for the district and cheerleader for the Council of Governments to say thank you for your work, and that on behalf of truly the nation's capital, the area around the nation's capital, sort of continuing to provide the cutting edge. How do you make a city great by embracing its diversity and inclusivity? I think we have the responsibility to make it work. So no heavy pressure. Let's have lunch.
Thanks very much. Thanks to COG for helping us and Sophie for coordinating things. And